The year is 1947. You're cruising down the Los Angeles streets, wind in your hair, sun in your eyes, regrets on your back, and your future in the road ahead. The shadow of the Hollywood sign lingers over top of you like a warm blanket of potential, but also like an oppressive weight. Two sides to every coin. A murder is on the front page of every newspaper and no one knows who did it. You're playing LA Noire. LA Noire is a game that, for its time, tried to break the mold of its competition. What it represents is almost larger than the game itself. A game that puts the focus on talking, detecting lies, sniffing out the truth, and uncovering clues over shooting and blowing things up. The game does have these elements in the end, but they are few and far between when compared to the time spent investigating crime scenes and gathering information. LA Noire was billed and built on a foundation of technology, realistic faces for characters portrayed by actors from Hollywood. This game was meant to be the real deal, a living proof that video games could be more than just shooting and killing. The game is nowhere near perfect. It has many problems throughout its runtime, like the fairly empty open world, some of the janky systems and bugs that even now plague the game, and unclear directions on mechanics and systems. But that doesn't stop it from being such a damn interesting game to play. A lot of the game is propped up by its story that takes a ton of inspiration from noir classics and puts an emphasis on realism. And LA Noire is unique in the grand scheme of things. It's very rare that detective games like these even get made, especially one set in real-world Los Angeles, trying to create that same noir style that so much other media already has. LA Noire is lacking quite a lot of the characteristics of the noir genre, and we'll get into that much deeper at a later point in the video, but this weird cross blend of noir and non-noir creates something so unique that it begs to be looked at. So that's what I'm going to be doing today. I'll be talking about gameplay, mechanics, story, and everything in between. If you enjoy the video and want to support the channel, consider liking this video and subscribing, as it really helps me out. You can also support over on Patreon, where I offer early access to my videos, updates, and extra content from time to time. Spoilers for LA Noire. It's me, your favorite son, and today I'd like to talk about LA Noire. The holiday season is quickly approaching, and getting something special for the important people in your life is a must. Raycon's everyday earbuds make the perfect gift for anyone who's on your nice list. These earbuds have tens of thousands of 5-star reviews online, and their newest model is even better than ever. They have a 32-hour battery life and multi-point connectivity that lets you pair two devices at once. They also feature active noise cancellation that is a must-have during the chaos of the holiday festivities, or just when you need to unwind and unplug. I personally use Raycon's earbuds when I'm working out in the morning. Getting a moment to focus or relax with some music or a podcast has become a part of my daily routine and really helps me dial in before I get started with the rest of my day. They're also weatherproof and sweat resistant, so you don't really have to worry about damaging them. The tap functions also allow you to quickly change between songs or tracks, so you don't have to be constantly pulling your phone out. These features are just great all around. I also really enjoy the personal protective case covers. They allow you to customize and personalize the look of your earbuds. They come in a ton of different colors and styles, and they also support wireless charging, so you don't even have to take the cover off to be able to get 90 minutes of battery life in 10 minutes of charge time. If you want to get the people in your life the gift of the year, then go to buyraycon.com/yourfavoriteson to save big for the holidays and get 25% off site-wide. That's right, you'll get up to 25% off everything on Raycon's site when you go to buyraycon.com/yourfavoriteson. Now back to the video. LA Noire was developed by Team Bondi, a studio founded by its creative director, Brendan McNamara. Bondi was based in Sydney, and a lot of the original members of the team were a part of Team Soho, a first-party developer, also a part of Sony Computer Entertainment. Team Soho was formed in 1994 and worked on 2 NBA shootout games, Porsche Challenge, Rapid Racer, Spice World, This Is Football 2, and This Is Football 2002. Their most well-known title was actually their last, a third-person action-adventure game for the PlayStation 2 called The Getaway. The Getaway was a relative success for the studio and sold somewhere around 4 million units. At this point, Brendan McNamara and some of the other team members of Team Soho left the studio to form their own company called Team Bondi. Pretty soon after their founding, Team Bondi had secured a deal with Sony Computer Entertainment of America to create a title for the upcoming PlayStation 3. It was a long-term exclusive deal that would see the project being entirely funded by SCEA. The game would be called LA Noire. The original idea for the game was to make a video game version of James Ellroy's novel LA Confidential, or at least a game heavily inspired by it. LA Noire was designed to be a game set in LA during the 40s. The player would control a detective in charge of many different cases, charged with the sole task of finding the truth along the way. More than that, though, McNamara envisioned the game as something that would challenge the audience. LA Noire was going to ask new questions from our audience in terms of gameplay, how the narrative plays out, and also the concept of success and failure. About 3 years into development, SCEA handed over the publishing rights to LA Noire to Rockstar. This was reportedly because the budget had risen so drastically that SCEA didn't want to invest any more money into the game. This was partly due to the large technical investments that the company was making into a new innovation. This new tech was called motion scan, which was developed by a company called Depth Analysis that was inextricably linked to Team Bondi. The company was also founded by McNamara, so it was virtually a part of the studio itself. Motion scan was a new way to scan actors' movements and performances, creating a new level of realism when it came to video game characters. The high budget also came from the fact that Bondi had to create their own proprietary engine instead of using Rockstar's Rage engine. LA Noire was also set to feature a massive open world that was meant to be as close as possible to real-life LA in the 40s. The team went to painstaking lengths to recreate certain buildings and locations. They used aerial photo references taken during the time period by a man named Robert Spence. At the time, Spence had been paid $10 to take images of buildings from a plane. He had to lug a 46-pound camera leaning out of the cockpit to achieve this. These photos were greatly helpful in recreating the city. The team also visited many buildings in LA, met with the LAPD, and visited the LAPD Historical Society. Tons of research was done to create a city that felt accurate to LA in 1947. The production team supposedly had 140 production Bibles, one for each historic location in the game. But outside of the budget, the development of LA Noire wasn't all smooth sailing. There were many troubles throughout the production of the game, but I'll get into those later. LA Noire was released after 8 years of development on May 17, 2011 in North America and May 20th, 2011 in the PAL region for the Sony PlayStation 3 and Microsoft Xbox 360. It was then released later on November 8th, 2011 in North America and November 11th, 2011 in the PAL region for PC, and a remastered version was released on November 14th, 2017 for the Nintendo Switch, the PlayStation 4, and the Microsoft Xbox One. I actually played the remastered version of the game for this review. The reason for this is that it was just the easiest to capture footage from. LA Noire never got a remastered version for the PC, and the original PC port is a bit clunky to work with. I don't mean this in terms of controls, but just graphical options, interfacing with menus, etc. The remastered version is good though. It has one large difference that affects gameplay, which I'll get into later. LA Noire begins with a montage and a narration. In some ways, it draws on many classic noir pieces, but seems to take at least some inspiration from LA Confidential, which has a similar intro. Confidential's introduction is a lot more comedic in the film, but L.A. Noire plays this a bit more straight. This montage presents an idyllic look at Los Angeles, a city of dreams, a city of potential, a city of privacy and family, of Hollywood and glamour, a city of work and reward. But something more sinister lays underneath, an underbelly that we can't quite see yet, but it lingers, a faint scent permeating the world, just enough to set off your senses every once in a while. There's a lot of imagery here to unpack, a ton of plot points that are referenced and noted here that will be incredibly important later in the tale. For now, we begin our first case, Upon Reflection. Another narration notes the structure of military life and how different that is to fighting corruption, how loose the bounds of something like this can be. One is rigid structure, and the other is undefined evil. This narration only appears in the first desk of the game, the one that acts as a tutorial for L.A. Noire. We will be playing as Officer Cole Phelps, who is a relatively new officer in the LAPD and is currently assigned to the patrol division of the department. These first few cases will act as tutorials and introductions to the different elements of L.A. Noire before we're left to our devices. Phelps and his partner, Ralph Dunn, get a call to respond to the scene of a shooting. When they get there, two homicide detectives are leaving the scene and ask us to find a revolver that was used to shoot a man named Scooter Payton. Except they don't really ask us, they're actually pretty big dicks about it.
You want us to look anywhere in particular?
Give it your best shot, guys. The dead guy's a lowlife. I'm not expecting any miracles here.
And if we recover the weapon?
Bag it and return it to technical services.
You hurry it up, Floyd. We got places
here
to be.
Happy hunting.
This short case is our introduction to investigating crime scenes, something that we'll do often throughout L.A. Noire. I won't get into gameplay until we actually get through all of the tutorials, so we'll talk about this in a bit. Cole eventually finds the revolver on the roof, intelligently spotted by noticing the reflection in an open window on the building nearby. Ralph suggests that they head back to the station immediately. The work they've already done would probably earn them a nice commendation in the department. Cole wants to take this a step further, though, and decides to head to the local gun store to check for the owner. There we find the name of a man who brought the gun, along with an address. When we get there, we find the man's apartment, and he says that he didn't realize the gun was missing. He tries to fight the police, but we take him down. His nearby pocketbook has names and numbers inside. We find Floyd Rose's name here, the detective that gave us the order to look for the gun in the first place. This suggests that the case goes far deeper than we expect, but once again, Ralph claims that we've gone far further than was expected of us, and we should just turn this guy in and look the other way. This is what Cole eventually chooses, as implicating a higher-up detective in a murder might not be the best course of action this early in Cole's career. We then see a flashback to Cole joining the Marine Corps. He gets lumped in with two other men, Jack Kelso and Hank Merrill. They're told that another bus is for OCS, and this bus is for MCRD, for men who want to fight. They choose to not board the bus of fighting and head in the other direction. OCS is Officer Candidate School, an institution that readies you for becoming an officer in the armed forces. After this, we begin our second patrol case, Armed and Dangerous. The narration seems that it's actually speaking to Cole this time. It isn't just an omniscient voice, but someone that knows him. It appeals to Cole's sense of justice and honor, noting that he wanted to do the right thing, wanted to clean up the streets and become a good cop.
You have to choose sides. A brown paper envelope or a Greyhound ticket to Palookaville.
The two get a call for shots fired at a local bank. When we get there, we quickly enter a shootout and clear out the goons holding up the building. This is basically our introduction to combat in the game. This case ends and we get another flashback. Cole is talking about making a name for himself in the war. Kelso shuts this down, claiming that he has Custer syndrome. This can also be called victory disease, when a soldier or commander has a win and becomes so arrogant or complacent that they lose sight of the bigger picture and end up taking severe casualties. This is how Kelso sees Cole, a man who wants big things, glory, fame, rewards. Kelso thinks that this could put other men's lives at risk, though, viewing an incredibly deadly war, World War II, as some platform for your career is a very dangerous game to play. The third case on the patrol desk is called Warrants Outstanding. The narration at the beginning hammers in the relationship between Kelso and Cole. The two just didn't match up at the end of the day. They were destined to be enemies, two puzzle pieces that didn't fit. Ralph is asking Cole about the war, but he refuses to talk about it. During this lack of conversation, the two spot Wendell Bauer, a man who jumped parole, moseying down the street. Cole chases after him and takes him down, serving as an introduction to the chase system in the game. Another flashback, and we see Cole giving his peers ratings based on their efficiency in leadership roles. Kelso is ranked at the bottom of nearly every score. He lashes out after hearing these results and chalks it up to schoolboy chicken shit rather than a genuine review. Kelso is reprimanded for this outburst, and we start the final case of the traffic/tutorial desk, Buyer Beware. The narration clues us into the fact that this is the case that set Cole apart, that made him a detective, that forced him up in the ranks. Cole hears shots fired and heads down the street to see a man dead on the sidewalk. This is our first case that allows us to actually interact with a small version of the larger loop that LA Noire has. We investigate a small crime scene, we interrogate someone nearby, and chase down a suspect that we can then take to the station and interrogate further. It turns out that the man that was murdered wasn't too fond of Jewish people and had been harassing our suspect. He decided to murder him on the street. We find this out either by heading to the gun store and tracking the weapon that we found, or interrogating the woman inside of the store that our victim was killed in front of. This is the final case that we'll do before we become an official detective of the LAPD. So we should probably talk about gameplay as a whole before we get into the main story of LA Noire. LA Noire was a game that was meant to break the mold for a game of this genre in this time. It would do this in many ways. First, by focusing on narrative rather than shooting and killing. LA Noire stands out among other games of its time, especially because it's a Rockstar game. Within a few years before LA Noire, Rockstar's largest games had been Red Dead Redemption and Grand Theft Auto 4. Both of these projects, in terms of gameplay, were based around shooting, killing, and driving or riding horses. And while LA Noire does have shooting and killing and driving, it is certainly not the focus of this game. The game instead decides to make conversation, deduction, and investigation its core mechanics. I'm sure that at the time, the game was viewed as GTA in the 40s, but that's not exactly what people would be getting when they bought the end product. LA Noire is split up into desks, and each desk is split up into cases. At the end of the patrol desk, Cole gets promoted to the first real position of his career, the traffic desk. At that point, he's officially a detective in the LAPD, and he will be investigating traffic cases. Each desk has a few cases, and each case acts as a long-form mission. Within each case, we will have to do a few different things when it comes to gameplay. First, we will have to investigate crime scenes. Investigating a crime scene will see us exploring different areas, looking for clues that might tell us who committed the crime at hand. Finding clues can be as simple as examining a wall or footprints on the ground, but certain items can be examined, which will require us to rotate the item to find a point of focus. Examining these pieces of the environment or items in the crime scene will give us clues that will be written down in our notebook. These clues will assist us in our investigation in 3 ways. They will firstly give us pieces of evidence that we can use to question individuals who are either suspects or have information on the crime. We'll get into questioning shortly, but just know that having these pieces of evidence will be extremely important in proving who really did the crime. These could prove contradictions that witnesses make, or convince a suspect that we have proof that they killed the victim. Secondly, we can find leads, pieces of information that will send us to specific areas with people connected to the crime, or will give us the identities of people that need to be questioned. These could be IDs from people's wallets that were left behind. It could be a flyer with a company name that needs to be investigated. The third way that clues help us is just by generally giving us a better overview of the crime. Finding small morphine syrettes littered around the house where an overdose took place might not specifically give us us a ton of official clues, but they will give us a picture of what was going on here. This was a den. People were shooting up, people partying, selling, and spreading these things far past the small confines of this apartment. These clues are not as important to the actual gameplay, but they tell a story, which is important to developing the larger narrative. Aside from gathering clues at crime scenes and important areas, we'll also have to question individuals related to the crime. During these sections, we will have to select questions from a list that Cole has written down in his book. Most of these are standard and programmed into the game, but we can get extra questions to ask individuals if we manage to find certain pieces of evidence, talk to certain people first, or visit certain places before questioning them. A good example of this is that in one of the first cases in the traffic desk, we will be tasked with investigating a hit-and-run accident. We can talk to the bartender and ask him 2 questions about the victim and whether he frequented this place or not. But if we talk to the woman who saw the victim before he was hit, we can find out that the victim was arguing with his wife before the accident. Since we know this information, we can then present it to the bartender and get some extra information based on this. Once we question a suspect on a specific subject, we have to analyze their response. This is where that expensive, cutting-edge motion scan technology comes in. Because actors' faces were scanned in for this game and their responses were acted out in front of high-tech cameras, we can see details and facial movements that we wouldn't be able to see before. LA Noire was definitely marketing itself as a cutting-edge game, something that would blend films and television in a way never seen before. The intention was that you would be able to see subtle changes in the faces of the questioned. This would allow you to determine if they were telling the truth, outright lying, or just hiding something. This level of realism, a recreation of the world that we currently inhabit, was foreign for a video game at this time. Even compared to Rockstar games, take a look at Niko Bellic, the protagonist of Grand Theft Auto 4 and the greatest Grand Theft Auto game in the series, let's be honest. He doesn't exactly look unrealistic, but he looks a bit cartoony when compared to some of the characters in LA Noire. The faces in this game look like real faces. Also, notice the facial movements of the time. They don't quite match, and it's clear that LA Noire is quite the step up in realism, in making these characters look like something closer to real people. But they don't look entirely real. The obvious topic here is that of the uncanny valley that we found ourselves in. These people don't look quite right. Part of it is the way that their eyes crinkle when they lie. Part of it is the repeated movements over and over again. Part of it is the way that the mouths dissolve and flicker into the mesh of the faces. But part of it is also just how close they do look to the actors that portray them. The uncanny valley was actually coined by a robotics professor named Masahiro Mori. This term is often misused to just describe something as strange, and people often say uncanny valley when they really mean uncanny. The actual theory really is easily presented by this graph. As something becomes more realistic, it comes closer to looking like a human. The affinity for this thing increases until it comes to the valley, a place where the thing looks like a human, but not exactly like it. The uncanny valley can be clearly seen in a lot of animatronics and wax dolls. This was the field in which the original theory was presented. It is the unexplainable feeling when you see something that just doesn't sit right with you. But this feeling is much more present in media and used much more heavily to identify strange-looking creatures in films, TV shows, and video games. Some notable examples were the Polar Express and Beowulf. This feeling is noted much less accurately these days because the times for media have changed. As technology progressed in the late 2000s and early 2010s, tons of productions deduced that trending towards realism was the way to go. If they had the tech, why not use these advancements to make things look as real as possible? But people don't exactly want this. If they want to see real, they'll watch actors on a screen. People generally actually want something stylized, something unreal. real. That's the point of watching an animated film or playing a video game. But this isn't exactly the case in every situation. It is the case for LA Noire. This game happens to inhabit that same valley, one I'll call the uncanny San Bernardino Valley. The characters in this game surely look off, to the point where LA Noire has inhabited meme culture long after it has become irrelevant in video game discussion as a whole. But there's more to this than just looking at characters that don't quite look right. It's that we have to actually interact with these characters. When questioning a suspect, we select a topic from the list. Cole probes them about this subject, and the witness responds. We have to watch their response closely, noticing small shifts in their body language, face, or tone. We will then be able to select a way to proceed. During this screen, the witness or suspect will be silent, but their face will be giving us clues as to whether they lied or told the truth. We have three options here. First, we can select the truth option, which means that we believe the person we're talking to told the truth, and Cole will proceed accordingly, getting some more information out of them. If we think that the person we're questioning is lying, then we can select one of the other two options, doubt or lie. If we believe they told a lie and we have proof of the lie, we choose lie. We will then be asked to select a clue from our list and present it to the individual. This will prove them wrong, and with the weapons of facts and logic on our side, we will have logically dominated this individual and they will be forced to tell us the truth. If we don't think they told the truth, but we don't have the evidence to prove it, the correct response will be doubt. Doubt is a pretty tricky beast. We will use it a lot during the game, and it's probably one of the more common correct responses across the course of the project. Of course, I don't have the exact stats on how many doubt responses there are compared to the lies and truths. I wouldn't go through the entire game and count every single response and compare them to the other two options. That would be insane. There are actually a total of 242 questions in the entire game, including the 5 DLC cases. 55 of those questions are correctly responded to with truth, or good cop, which makes up 22.73% of the correct responses. 77 of those questions are correctly responded to with lie or accuse, making up 31.82% of the correct responses. And 110 of those questions are correctly responded to with doubt, or bad cop, which makes up 45.45% of the correct responses, meaning that doubt makes up almost half of the correct responses in the game. But the reason that doubt is an odd beast is that when you select this response, Cole does a lot more than just doubt the witness statement. He outright verbally assaults them.
Bartenders hear all sorts of things. Are you gonna tell me, or do we have to start playing rough? You better give us something, Cliff, or we're gonna make this hard on you. You're a two-time loser. If you don't give me something, I'm gonna ask the DA for the maximum. You're looking at 10 years, Belasco. Kiss your youth goodbye. You learned to strangle with the rope in the army?
Obviously, the original game was criticized for this disparity in option and response. The remastered version of the game actually renamed these options so that they fit more with what Cole would end up doing. Truth was changed to good cop, doubt was changed to bad cop, and lie was changed to accuse. This response honestly changes the way that we approach most of these situations, because in the original, the labels for our choices aren't really consistent to each other. If we select lie or truth, we are determining that the individual that we're speaking to has told a lie or a truth, but doubt is noting what Cole will do. He doubts their response. Cole is doubting the suspect is lying or telling the truth. It doesn't make a ton of sense, but with the new labeling system, we are choosing what Cole will do across the board. He will take a good cop approach if the suspect is telling the truth. He will take a bad cop approach if the suspect is lying, but he doesn't have the evidence to back up his claims, and he will accuse them if they are lying, and he has the evidence to support it. This is a large part of the gameplay in LA Noire. A good chunk of the game is investigating crime scenes, and a good chunk is questioning suspects. But questioning suspects requires us to interact with this uncanny valley, not just to stand on the edge and look down into its depths, but to dive off that same edge and face plant on the rocks at the bottom. The uncanny valley was originally thought of as a theory about seeing some sort of robot or animatronic that resembled a human. But what if that robot spoke like a human? What if it acted like a human? What if it lied like a human? What if we could speak to it and read its body language? What if a piece of media required that we pretend it is human and not just a collection of geometry with facial scanned movements strapped on top like a skin suit? It's enough to look at these anomalies, but to interact with them, to participate in this grand illusion, is on another level. But to its credit, that gives the game its own distinct style, its own flavor. You can recognize a screenshot or clip from LA Noire just by looking at its characters. The uncanny, close to real-life imagery, the characters shifting around from side to side and not keeping eye contact becomes a part of its style, a part of its world. But it creates this effect where you feel like you're being tested. You can sense the simulation when you're inside of it, that these automatons have been set up for you and you alone. These cases are constructed by robots, by machines for our development. It's our job to interact with these machines and respond to them correctly, like some sort of 40s detective Kobayashi Maru. And I don't mean this as a criticism of the game. I pointed out to note and describe what it actually feels like to play LA Noire. It's such a heavy part of the experience that it needs to be noted, mainly because the motion scan technology, at least in this form, sort of fell by the wayside after LA Noire. Sure, there are actors being scanned into games like Death Stranding even now, but this iteration of the tech was only used here, and it makes LA Noire look, play, feel, and act like no other. Giving correct responses to our suspects or witnesses will usually net us another piece of information. Just in the same way that it is important to gather all of the evidence at a crime scene, it's also important to properly handle persons of interest. We will be able to gain clues that we can use to question other suspects later. If a suspect lies about their alibi and we manage to prove this, they might tell us that they saw a man moving through the area at the time of the murder. This could become a clue, and we could find that man later, proving one of his lies with this information. This investigation system and the questioning system both work hand in hand. It's a chain that goes back and forth, a cycle that requires both ends to properly complete itself. But like I said before, the game isn't all just questioning and investigation. Certain suspects will run, certain suspects will fight back. That's just the nature of police work. If a suspect runs on foot, we will have to chase them. This means that we'll be running through backyards and alleyways, climbing onto rooftops, and making sure that your person of interest doesn't get away. We can either aim down our sights and hold it on the individual, and if done correctly, Cole will fire off a shot in the air to stop them, or we can tackle them if we get close enough. Chases can also occur in cars, something that we'll do quite a lot. In these chases, our goal is to spin the runaway vehicle out, driving them off the road and crashing them into nearby buildings or objects. And if a suspect decides to shoot at us, or a group decides to put up a fight, then we'll get involved in a shootout. Shooting is honestly pretty similar to other Rockstar games of the time. We have some light auto aim, damage is pretty realistic with headshots being one-shot kills, and hits to the body requiring a few to fell a thug. We can use a variety of different weapons, most of which Cole usually keeps in the trunk, but we can also take loose ones from dead goons. Not much to write home about in terms of gun battles. We won't participate in them during every mission, they're mostly spread out across the runtime of the game, and they'll become a bit more common during the final few missions, when things start to really heat up. But they aren't so common that we'll be doing them all the time. The final aspect of gameplay that I haven't really talked about yet are intuition points. Intuition points are our main progression mechanic in this game. We gain experience when we question suspects or investigate crime scenes. Ranking up will give us more intuition points. These points can be used across cases in two ways. We can use them to assist in questioning by removing an incorrect answer, or by seeing what other people's responses are. We can also use a point to show us all of of the clues at an investigation site so that we don't have to find them ourselves. These points can be really useful in a pinch, especially if we're having trouble with a lead and can't quite figure out if someone's lying or not. If you also just want to make sure you get all the clues and don't want to wander around a crime scene bumping into walls, it's a great tactic. After we find out who killed the man on the sidewalk and bring him back to the station for interrogation, Cole is given a test. He has to question the witness himself and get a confession from him. This is his big break, the next stop in his career. James Donnelly is watching this and is counting on Cole to get this confession.
But I'm curious as to whether you can turn your hand to interrogation. Takes a certain animal cunning, lad.
If Cole can manage to do this, bright things are coming in his future. And he does, as we successfully get a confession from this man, because we can't really fail. And if we do, we just get yelled at and told to get back in there, fully restarting the sequence. But it still matters, damn it. Donnelly tells Cole that he's going to have a word with the chief of police, that a promotion is coming soon and he should buy some suits to prepare. With that, Cole has been promoted and reassigned to the traffic desk. This isn't exactly the most glamorous of assignments, but it is a step up from just patrolling the city streets. We're actually assigned to cases now. We don't just stumble upon them. We're given jobs to complete, not just randomly handed them by the whims of fate. And with that, we get a new partner, Stefan Bukowski. Bukowski is a little bit more loose with his words than Cole. He's much more of a classical detective, the one you imagine when you picture the archetype in your mind. He runs off at the mouth, he's quick-witted and snarky, he knows how to do his job. He also has more experience than Cole, which means he'll be filling the role of information provider from here on out. He will be our sage to guide us through this unexplored world. Not a fantasy forest with imps and fairies, but a building made of brick, full of servants of justice and shadows of sin. Cole is introduced to the rest of the department and his military history is brought up. He received a Silver Star in the war fighting the Japanese. Since Cole is new, he's on sort of a trial period. This first case will make or break him. If he does well, he can get more cases, but if he messes up, then he's on shit duty until further notice. Our first case is called the driver's seat and sees us heading to an abandoned car on the railway. Here we find a vehicle full of blood, a nearby wallet identifying that the car belongs to an Adrian Black, a piece of piping stained with blood, and a receipt for a live pig in the trunk of the car. The rail yard operator nearby doesn't have a ton of information. He isn't familiar with the victim. He doesn't know what happened, and it doesn't seem like he actually has anything to do with the case other than finding the car initially. He does lie to us about checking the wallet, but tells the truth on everything else. He saw the car here in the parking lot a few days ago, but doesn't know much else relevant. We can head to question Mrs. Black, Adrian's wife, at their nearby home. Here we can find some more clues around their house. A flyer for an Instaheat heater that was installed recently, a train ticket to Seattle, and a picture of Adrian with a note on the back from a woman named Nicole, who is definitely not Mrs. Black. Not yet, at least. We can also reconstruct the heating equipment outside to find that the pipe that must have done Black in was taken from his own home. Questioning Mrs. Black will give us a good amount of information. While she doesn't outright lie that much, she does tell us that Adrian spends a lot of time at Kavanaugh's bar with a man named Frank Morgan, and that she knew about the mystery woman named Nicole. She wasn't sure if Adrian was planning on leaving her or not, and now she's just concerned for his life. At this point, things are certainly fishy. With the evidence at the home, the odd responses from the wife, Adrian could have been killed by his own spouse. We can now question Frank Morgan, Adrian's friend at their local watering hole. Here we find out that nothing actually happened to Adrian. At first, Morgan tells us that Adrian fled the city for Seattle, but we quickly realize that this is not true, and that he's staying at an apartment nearby. He faked his own death to try and get away to his new floozy in another city. We can head to this apartment where Adrian admits to the crime of wasting police resources pretty quickly and hoofs it to try and make a getaway. We can chase him down where Phelps and Bukowski give Adrian Black a pretty good scolding.
Why the melodrama? I thought it would be easier. No, it just got a whole lot harder. Adrian Black, you're under arrest for conspiracy and fraud. We'll see what the DA has to say about wasting police resources on a wild goose chase like this. You're gonna lose your wife, lose your job, and probably end up in the big house. I hope she was worth it, Adrian.
Gordon Leary, the captain of homicide, gives Phelps his flowers for solving his first case this quickly, his first day on the job. It seems like Cole is living up to his image. The herald of justice in the LAPD is moving up the ladder well, and it won't be long before we end up in another department entirely. Before we move on, I'd like to note that a lot of the cases are based on real-life cases from 1947 in LA. This is because the developers did a lot of research into newspapers from the time. They found cases that were almost unbelievable, and a few of them they couldn't even use because they were too wacky for the tone of the game. Real life is stranger than fiction and all that. The real case saw a man called Eugene White cut his own hand with a razor in his car to make it look like he had been killed. In the real-life case, White just wanted to get away and saw himself working at a lumber camp or going to sea. The next case that we'll complete in LA Noire is actually a DLC case. 5 DLC cases were released in total for the game and are all included in the remastered version of the game. When playing this version, the DLC cases are just integrated into the story. They're inserted in between cases from the base game. The next case that we'll take on is called the Consul's Car. A car has been abandoned in an alleyway, directly in the backyards of some residential houses. When we look into the car, it seems to be a diplomatic vehicle. 2 of the wheels have been stolen, 1 of the flags is gone, the plates are missing, etc. The important pieces of information are that we can find a wrench from the Dewey Brothers dealership nearby, and we can talk to a man who witnessed someone stealing the car. He says that he saw a group of Mexican kids dropping the car off here. When the man walks away, we can investigate a notebook that the man found in the car, which reveals some contact information on a man named William Dewey, the owner of the Dewey Brothers dealership. We can actually talk to the owner of the car and the notebook, Juan Valdez. It turns out that Valdez was into young men and kept his notebook to keep track of these young men. He met Dewey at a bar, and it seems that he took a liking to one of Dewey's mechanics. We can head to the dealership and through process of elimination find out that Gabriel Delgado was the one who left his wrench at the scene of the crime. We can question Dewey here as well, who will implicate Delgado and eventually tells us that he was the one who stole the car. We can head to Delgado's residence to find his girlfriend here who tries to cover him, but the diplomatic plates in the garage, the stolen tires, the Argentinian flag, and the fresh breakfast on the dining room table tell us Delgado did commit the crime and he was here recently. She eventually tells us that Delgado is currently at a street race. It seems like what really happened here is that Delgado pushed off the advances of the Argentinian consul and stole his vehicle as an act of revenge. Regardless, he still committed a crime, and even though Valdez is guilty of a very different crime, even worse, he has diplomatic immunity and will never be able to try him. We can find Delgado at his street race and chase him down, eventually crashing his car and taking the man in. I'd like to note here that this case is a pretty good example of how cases can go in this game and how dynamic they can really be. The first time I played this game, I got a question wrong at the crime scene, and I didn't even find the notebook that was on the bench. I never ended up questioning Valdez, so I just went straight to the dealership. This means that there was a significant chunk of the story that I missed out on. I still got the conviction in the end. The same person went to jail, but it was a pretty straight and cut case of guy stole car and ran in illegal street races. It wasn't nearly as complicated as the full story. Each case that we complete is judged upon completion. We can see how many questions we got correctly and how many we got wrong or missed. You can also see how many clues you missed. Getting to the end of a case and realizing that you missed something big tells you that you need to go back and get the full story, because clearly something important was gone. It's also worth noting that we're judged on completion based on how much damage we did to vehicles, the city, and pedestrians. This is a numerical incentive to not play the game like you would Grand Theft Auto. The game heavily tries to discourage this because it doesn't exactly fit in with the world of LA Noire. You're a cop in the LAPD. It doesn't make sense to just start shooting pedestrians and blowing things up. If we hit things on the street or accidentally clip a pedestrian or run into another car, we normally get a pop-up warning us about the conduct that an officer in the LAPD should follow. McNamara commented on this in early interviews about the game. It's a bit more of a mature experience. When we show LA Noire to people who are all familiar with GTA, they play it a different way. They keep the same car, they stick to the speed limit, they avoid fender benders, and they stick to the assignments they're tasked with. They behave more like they would in a real-world setting. And this is true because when I first decided to play the game, I followed this behavior. Now, that isn't exactly new for me. I've always wanted to do a playthrough of Grand Theft Auto where I entirely follow the rules of the road outside of missions and forced scenarios. There's something appealing about role-playing in these huge realistic worlds. LA Noire is a game that makes you want to avoid getting high numbers of damage at the end of the case. It makes you want to stop at red lights. It makes you want to yield to pedestrians. Of course, you'll naturally fall back into jumping old cars over ramps to take a shortcut through a half-built housing development, but the pull is still there. This is because of the world that LA Noire has built, the environment, the feeling of playing the game. We'll get there in a bit, but for now, our next case is called A Marriage Made in Heaven. Before that case starts, we see another flashback to Cole's days in the military. The troops are preparing for weekend liberty, and Kelso specifically is excited to see his sisters, who are coming to visit. When a final inspection comes through, Kelso is told that his weapon isn't clean enough. He talks back to the captain, and he cancels everyone's weekend liberty. Because of all of this, Kelso has decided that he's going to join a rifle company so that he can see combat and fight the enemy. A Marriage Made in Heaven starts out as we see a pedestrian hit by a car while crossing the street. Leary gives the hit-and-run case to Cole and Bukowski. When we get there, we can find a note on the body that tells us about a new life insurance policy that was taken out on the victim. But as far as evidence goes, it looks like a pretty standard hit-and-run. We can speak to a witness out front who heard two people arguing, the victim and his wife. She tells us that the car was a Lincoln Continental, and we get the first 3 letters of the license plate. We can then question the bartender. He tells us that the victim and his wife were in a pretty heated argument. She was upset enough that the owner, Leroy, took her home instead. We can then head to the Pattinson residence to talk to the wife of the deceased. When we question her, she doesn't really seem that broken up about her husband's death. She mentions that she has someone here, and it turns out that Leroy Sabo is already here to comfort her. The wife was already filing for divorce, but Lester didn't know that. So Lorna was getting ready to divorce her husband and spending time with the owner of the bar, and it just so happens that he was killed by a car right in front of that same bar. Add on to that the whole situation that Lester had a life insurance policy taken out on him before he died. We can get a lead on the car that was supposed to have killed Lester and head to the address associated with the car. When we confront the man that owns the vehicle, he immediately makes a run for it and we have to chase him down. He admits to the hit and run but didn't know that the man died. He saw a man and woman right next to him and assumed they could take him to a hospital. We can head to the coroner to find something interesting, that Lester wasn't killed from the car, but he was stabbed beforehand. The coroner originally thought that the wounds were from the hood ornament of the car, but it turns out it was from a knife. He was actually pushed in front of the car to make it look like an accident. We can head back to the bar again to find the murder weapon dumped inside of a trash can to hide the evidence. For the keen-eyed investigators out there, you can actually find this knife on the first scan of the crime scene. It's initially brushed off as unrelated to the crime, but as soon as we find out that the victim was stabbed, it has a lot more significance. We can get into a shootout here with Sabo, the owner of the bar, and chase him down to the alleys behind the building. This can also end in tragedy if we visit the Pattinson home, as Leroy decides to kill Lorna and run away. Our next case, A Slip of the Tongue, begins when Leary tells us about a stolen car that was recently located. This is the second of the DLC cases in the game. When we arrive to the place the car was sighted, we find the vehicle leaving the residence. We can chase the car down to find the driver is Cliff Harrison. He just bought the car recently, and he isn't lying. He shows us the proof of purchase, but then how was this same exact car reported stolen? We can head back to the seller, Coombs Automotive. He shows us the bill of sale for the car, and we find out who he originally bought it from, a woman named Jean Archer. Coombs seems mostly innocent. He may not have requested the stolen car or been behind it, but he definitely wasn't asking questions. The documents also could have been a forgery, but who knows? To find that out, we'll have to look into the company that prints the pink slips. Before we can do that, we can find out that Jean Archer gave a fake address when she filled out her documentation. Turns out, though, that the central station is holding someone that has been arrested with another stolen car that has legitimate papers. We find out that this man is actually the driver for whatever stolen car operation is going on here. There's a larger racket at play, but Velasco gives us a location for the warehouse that the cars are held at. We We can also visit Jean Archer, who's currently at the bank cashing a check. She gives us a name of someone who's in charge of the racket named Bigelow. When we get to the warehouse, we end up in a massive shootout. Because these thugs aren't going down lightly, Bigelow is the only one that doesn't shoot back. And with a warehouse full of dead thugs, we can get a confession out of him. But even further into this whole ring is that the printing company themselves are involved. We can head over there and interview Levital, who admits that he's being blackmailed for his gambling debts to help out the car racket. These people were stealing cars and then selling them to shady dealerships with forged paperwork. And it was going very smoothly until we got involved. Before we start the last case of the traffic desk, we get another flashback to the war. Cole is heading on a boat to fight in the war, and his hopes are high. He's ready to fight for his country, to be a soldier. His men are more worried, though. Worried for the war they're going to have to fight. Worried for the violence that they'll endure. And the brothers they will lose. The final case on the traffic desk is called the Fallen Idol. We see a short scene of a car being set to drive off a cliff. We get a case only with the details that the woman inside the car claims she was doped by someone and crashed because she was intoxicated. Another girl was involved in the crash too, and the crime scene is right across the street. When we get there, we find out that a connected woman is involved named June Ballard. Her brother is a movie star, and she's married to Guy McAfee. The other girl involved in the accident was just a kid, Jessica Hamilton. We can find torn underwear in the car and a note to Jessica from her parents. The coroner shows us that a voodoo head was pinned to the gas pedal, which is what caused the car to crash into the sign in the first place. We can question June Ballard nearby to find out that Mark Bishop was the one that she claims drugged her and Jessica. She isn't worried about it because she thinks her husband is going to take care of him. Based on our evidence, it seems like something disgusting and nefarious was going on here, like something happened to Jessica before the car crash, but June is trying to cover it up. June Ballard seems to be lying about almost everything here. It's clear that Bishop did something, and he had some sort of deal with Ballard, but she wants to cover it up, maybe because she wants vigilante justice dealt out by her husband, or maybe she had some part in it and doesn't want to be incriminated. We can head over to the hospital and talk to the other victim in this case, Jessica Hamilton. Her hospital reports note that she was taken advantage of at some point, so Cole's suspicions were correct. Jessica doesn't want to admit what happened, obviously. She's embarrassed. She's just a kid. Jessica ran away from home and she had big dreams of being a star, but she was taken advantage of by some sick producer. She gives us a really good piece of evidence, though, that she remembers seeing a mermaid being on the front of the building where the assault happened at. We then see June at the police station with her lawyer, and as she leaves, we can tail her. This is another mechanic that the game has, but we don't use it that often. There are two variations of tailing sequences. The first, which we'll do now, is in a car. It's pretty straightforward. We mostly just keep a good distance from the car, but not too far. Standard tailing mission stuff in a game like this. The other type of tailing that we'll do is on foot. We'll have to follow people down the streets and make sure they don't see us. We do this by utilizing the cover system and also interacting with objects that make us go incognito. Both are pretty standard fare, but they don't appear in every single mission, just sporadically throughout the campaign. We can tail June into a coffee shop and overhear her conversation on the phone. It seems like she's putting out a hit on Mark Bishop, and she doesn't want a lesson to be taught, she wants a life to be taken. We can manage to get Bishop's address from this conversation. We can head there next and find that Bishop isn't there, but his wife is. The apartment is a wreck, and some men just showed up and trashed the place. We can find a check here for $20,000, a saddle prop for a film called Gay Cowboys, a photo and a prop from a film called Intolerance, and a picture of Bishop and a man named Hopgood outside of Silver Screen Props that just so happens to have a mermaid statue out front. Mrs. Bishop knows June Ballard, but only because she says that the woman is harassing her husband. She claims that June is simply just angry because she didn't get a role in her husband's latest film. And since Bishop was paying Hopgood's wife $20,000, it's possible that he's being blackmailed. But Mrs. Bishop doesn't have much information on it. Mrs. Bishop's theory is that June sacrificed the girl to get a role in a film, and she says something pretty telling.
This is a sick town, Detective. Are you sure you really want to know? The truth is, my husband likes them young.
After this, we can finally head to Silver Screen Props. There we find Marlon Hopgood and investigate his building. Here we find a terrifying setup, a double mirror into a dank and dark room that's recording everything that happens in it. I think you can figure out what was happening here. Jessica Hamilton's tape is gone, and when we leave, we're confronted by some goons outside that want to find Bishop. They seem to be the same goons that destroyed his house earlier today. I haven't talked much about our partner for this desk, Bukowski, but he's probably my favorite partner in the game. He's the wisecracking, loose-lipped classic detective. He doesn't seem to take things seriously until he does, and when he does, it's when things are really important. And when it's time to get serious, he doesn't mince words.
At least he's polite. Kinda dumb, but polite.
But I'm a lot less polite, you smug son of a bitch. So let me put it in ruder terms that even a pair of blockheads like you might understand. The only reason that you don't have bars on your windows already is because you're small fry. And we don't waste our time on small fry. You stay away from Bishop, and you stay away from me. Is that clear enough for you, asshole?
These gangsters end up shooting at us, and we have a final destination, the place where we might actually find Bishop, at the set of an upcoming film called Jungle Drums. When we find him, he's already running away, and we get a massive, awesome chase sequence across this huge set. This is probably one of LA Noire's biggest strengths outside of its story, these huge set pieces. We jump over these objects, chase our suspect through huge spaces, and climb until we're eventually high above the skyline of the city. It's such a great and massive sequence that feels so intense as the set begins to crumble around us. And when we finally catch up to Bishop, he gives himself up. But it's just the beginning, because McAfee's goons are here to kill Bishop themselves. In a really strange turn of events, we have to protect our suspect as people are trying to kill him and climb back down this massive set piece. It's such a good twist on the morality of this case, because we've just spent the past hour proving the horrible things that this man has done, but now we have to make sure he doesn't die, only so he can feel the swift sword of justice come down on top of his head. When we eventually get to the bottom, Bishop is taken into custody, and the star detective Cole Phelps has another name on his record. Cole is told that he has a new assignment. He's been promoted to the homicide desk, where he'll be getting a new partner and new cases. But before that, Roy Earl shows up to buy the two-star detectives a drink. Roy Earl is the hotshot detective at the LAPD. He's the Hollywood detective. He works the Vice desk and rubs elbows with Hollywood stars. He takes a lot from Jack Vincennes in LA Confidential. In the film, in particular, that character is basically a TV cop, working closely with the show and making sure that all of his arrests are done in front of a camera. This is a pretty good base for who Roy Earl is, but when he takes us to a jazz club called the Blue Room, it's clear that he doesn't exactly respect certain groups of people.
Maybe another night, Roy. She's pretty beat up about it.
Get your hands off me. Don't ever tell me what to do or what not to do, Alphonse. You got a nice club here. Don't spoil it.
We see a woman in the back that is talking to someone named Harlan Fontaine. Fontaine has actually been introduced to us already. I just haven't talked about it quite yet. Throughout the game, we can find different newspapers that are placed in different crime scenes and investigation environments. These will show us different events that are happening throughout the city. This will tie into the larger narrative and conspiracy that's at play in LA Noire, and will only fully come into view later in the game. The first few newspapers introduce us to Harlan Fontaine and Courtney Sheldon. Courtney Sheldon is watching a lecture that Fontaine is giving at a university. Sheldon wants to learn psychology to help treat soldiers with PTSD. Fontaine helps Sheldon with this endeavor, but it becomes clear that Harlan is providing patients morphine and drugging them heavily during sessions. And we eventually see that Sheldon is trying to sell drugs on the street, attempting to get the help of Mickey Cohen, a renowned gangster in LA. At the beginning of this case, we see Fontaine consoling a woman named Elsa because her best friend has died. Earl introduces Phelps to Elsa, but she doesn't really care to meet him. Earl slaps her in the face for her insolence before the cops leave the room. With this, we can begin the next desk of LA Noire, but first we need to talk about LA Noire's style. LA Noire is titled in such a way that would make you think that it's a noir game, but that's not really exactly the case. And just like in the case of the Uncanny Valley type of realism used to create a memorable style, LA Noire does the same sort of thing with its story and genre. What do you think of when you hear the word noir? You probably think black and white, fedoras, cigars and cigarettes, smoke-filled rooms, murder conspiracies, punchy writing, femme fatales, dames and dolls, detectives, crime and murder. Before writing this video, I wasn't too familiar with the noir genre, so I decided to give myself the task of immersing myself in media that filled out these criteria. I watched Chinatown, LA Confidential, Sweet Smell of Success, and The Maltese Falcon, all of which were inspirations for LA Noire. I also read The LA Quartet by James Ellroy. One of the books in the series was LA Confidential, which the film was an adaptation of. I also read some books by Raymond Chandler, in particular The Big Sleep. I listened to the stylings of Chet Baker, Dexter Gordon, and Miles Davis, and I may not have been a fan of the genre for a lifetime, but I think I have a good enough grasp on it at this point to say what is and isn't noir. And LA Noire isn't exactly not noir, but it also isn't fully noir. It has some of the hallmarks. It has detectives in fedoras solving crimes. They aren't exactly private investigators. Cole is an official detective, but the period is there. LA Noire is set in the 40s, an era which a lot of the original noir tales are also set. LA Noire has the backdrop. It's set in LA, just like the LA Quartet, just like Chinatown and The Big Sleep. Hollywood and New York are the most common settings for noir stories. It's not uncommon that stories use LA as a setting, mainly because of the perfect contrast that it automatically creates. Hollywood is often portrayed in this era as glitz and glamour. The early days of the movie industry was seen as elegance, rising stars, and fame. Contrasting this with murder and conspiracy, showing the dark underbelly of this world creates a perfect bed for conspiracy. And that's what we'll see here. As things begin to unfold, it becomes clear that a lot more is going on than Cole thinks. Cover-ups, sweeping things under the rug, saving the wrong people. But the big things that make you think noir aren't really there in LA Noire. And I don't say this as a negative. You would expect more dark desk lit by lamps, more smoke-filled rooms, more heavy narration. And the biggest thing that isn't really here is the punchy writing. Classic noir has a very specific cadence to it, and you probably know what I'm talking about without me providing any examples. You know that there's a certain way that these stories speak, that the characters voice their thoughts. This is present in LA Noire, but only for a brief period, while we're still on the patrol desk. The narration at the beginning of these cases will have this style, but after that it sort of disappears.
In the Marine Corps, you deal with the chain of command. Mistakes get made, but you deal with them. You know what you're fighting for and that you're on the same team. But dealing with corruption is like chasing shadows. You never know whether the guy you're talking to is on the pad, or whether it's your partner, or maybe even the watch commander. So who do you trust, Cole? I made up my mind a long time ago.
LA Noire is not noir in the classic sense, and it's mostly a feeling. The characters in this game just speak as if they were living in the 1940s, and that's fine, because it gives LA Noire a distinct style in this space. I think a part of this comes from LA Noire's biggest inspirations. LA Noire was heavily inspired by the works of James Ellroy. A lot of Ellroy's most famous works were written in the 80s and 90s, and go a bit lighter on some of those noir elements as well. The first book in the LA Quartet, The Black Dahlia, is a fantastic novel that builds up its protagonist and his partner in such a fantastic way, it makes the reader almost inseparable with them. A lot of Ellroy's writing deals with the things that the LAPD doesn't want people to know, and the corruption inside of the system. LA Noire will deal with this too, but in terms of style, LA Noire is most similar to the film LA Confidential. This film does similar things by keeping certain aspects of the noir genre and ditching others. It's also worth noting that a lot of characters are based on characters from that story. Cole Phelps in particular is almost identical to Ed Exley from that film. Exley is played by Guy Pearce, and he's the goody two-shoes officer. He's the bastion of justice. He does everything by the book, and in the first act, he's willing to go against his fellow colleagues in the department when they end up in a brawl with prisoners. This is Cole to a T. Cole is someone that always tries to do the right thing, no matter who has to go down for it, no matter what he has to do to get it done. His moral compass drives him fully. The best way to describe Cole's character is that if he was on an alignment chart, he would be lawful good. This doesn't mean that he has never done anything wrong, and there's a reason that he's trying to be fully good at this point. But as we get further into the story, we will uncover Cole's past and learn where these motivations originate from. But for now, we start the homicide desk and start to get into some of the larger cases of the game. Cole is no longer dealing with traffic problems, issues with speeding tickets and stolen vehicles, but actual murders. With a new desk, we get a new partner, Rusty Galloway. Rusty Galloway is a bit more of a reluctant detective archetype. We'll find that he's very quick to finish cases and rush to convictions rather than finding the truth. We can head to the crime scene for our first murder case. This murder is pretty high profile though, as the journalists are swarming us before we even officially arrive. We find the body of a young woman with the words BD written on her body in red lipstick. This is clearly a reference to Black Dahlia. LA Noire begins to imagine what would happen if the famed werewolf murderer continued murdering. Black Dahlia is the name used for a woman called Elizabeth Short, who was killed in 1947, and her killer was never found. At this point, we aren't sure what this is. It could easily be a copycat killer or someone trying to get the cops off their trail. We can find a red lipstick nearby, but it's brand new. This killer must have brought their own. There's a puzzle at the crime scene that turns out to be an intricate lighter for the club called the Bomba. This is our first destination, and we can head there immediately. The bartender saw the victim here last night and tells us her name is Celine Henry. She was being served by Mr. McCall, who we can interview in the back right now. Apparently, he's known Celine and her husband Jacob for a long time. McCall says there was a man hitting on Celine last night and he got his license plate. McCall also knows about the ring that Celine was missing when she died. It was a garnet ring. He tries to lie about it, but he was the one that bought it for her. It's not clear whether they had a fling or were just good friends, but her husband wasn't aware of it. McCall doesn't think Jacob killed her. He tried to call him when Celine got too drunk last night, but he didn't show up. So it seems like Celine went home with a random guy, and this mystery man was the real killer. We can head to Celine's house where it looks like someone already broke in. We can also find a newspaper here that gives us the next chunk of this larger background story. Fontaine was treating a veteran who seems to have burned a house down for him, but the house was supposed to be empty, and it wasn't. Investigating the house further, we can find that Jacob left the home to stay at another apartment. Apparently the two were having a quarrel. We can find Celine's box that's missing her garnet ring and a picture of her wearing this ring in a plane. She used to be a pilot in the old days. Finally, we can head to the apartment that Jacob is staying at to question him, but before we do, we can find a notepad where a message was written, seemingly by Jacob, trying to get someone to take his wife out. His shoe size also doesn't match the prints that were at the crime scene, so the hitman narrative might be the truth. Jacob says that he was called and told his wife was too drunk, but he decided not to go and pick her up. This is not entirely true because he showed up to talk to her around 9, but he didn't take her home. He claims that he was trying to have her committed, not murdered. Rusty speaks out against Jacob because he thinks he's lying and we have to fight him to be able to take him to the station. We can question him at the station, but before we get there, we get another lead. The license plate that McCall gave us is tracked back to a man named Alonzo Mendez. Before we go interview him, we have to question Jacob. Donnelly doesn't care about our new lead. He wants us to get a confession out of Jacob. These are the first signs of the cracks in the LAPD, that these people don't truly care about getting to the truth. We can question Jacob, who does have access to the weapon that Celine was murdered with, a socket wrench, and he has a motive for the murder. But certain things don't add up. Jacob didn't know about the ring, and he wouldn't have broken into the house because it was his own home. And he honestly has kind of a sad story. He knew that his marriage was falling apart. He felt like he wasn't enough for his wife because he was just a mechanic, and his wife always wanted something bigger. In the end, Jacob doesn't confess because he didn't kill his wife. Donnelly is upset that we didn't get a confession, but we still need to visit Mendez's apartment. When we get there, we immediately find the evidence we need, a bloody socket wrench and a used piece of lipstick. Mendez arrives while we're searching and we have to chase him down. Once we find him, Donnelly is a lot happier with our performance. As long as he gets a culprit, he doesn't care who it is. The next case opens on the Blue Room Jazz Club. We see Elsa singing to a dancing audience, and Cole is enjoying the show. The Golden Butterfly then starts. We see a woman attacked as she's getting into her car. It seems this woman was murdered and dumped in a park with similar markings to the last one. This woman isn't marked with BD like the previous case, but it is a murdered woman in a park, and she even has a ring removed from her finger. Her name turns out to be Deidre Muller, and there's more size 8 shoe prints at the scene. Cole immediately thinks that this case could be connected to the last, that it's possible they got the wrong man, but he is talked down by Rusty. We can head to Deidre's residence where her daughter is the only one home. We can investigate the house and find size 8 shoes in the bedroom, an empty wristwatch container, and ring box. We can question Michelle to deliver the terrible news that her mother is dead. She tells us about the jewelry that we didn't find at the crime scene and that her mom didn't show up yesterday to pick her up from the dance. Her parents also argued, and her father hit her mother once but made up for it by buying her a pin. Her father shows up at this point and we can interview him as well. He tries to lie about his shoe size, leading to suspicion that he could have killed his wife. They apparently had an argument about who would pick up Michelle, and Cole tries to claim that he's having an affair, but it hasn't been proven yet. Cole decides to let him go for now, but as we leave, he starts to burn evidence in his backyard. We chase him down, and it turns out he was trying to burn shoes with blood on them. It just so happens that the body of the victim had shoe prints all over her. Michelle gets sent to juvenile hall and Hugo is arrested. We can head to the local high school where we find someone scoping out the students and track him down. This man's name is Eli, and he's surely a fucking creep, but he also happens to have the golden pin that Hugo talked about. We can search the victim's car to find a bloody rope inside and Hugo's bloody mechanic overalls, as well as a tire iron that seems to be the murder weapon. We can head to the morgue to find out that the cause of death was strangulation. We can even find the particular type of rope that was used, a sailor's rope. We can then head to the police station to interrogate Hugo. He claims that the blood on his boots was just rabbit's blood from hunting. We can confront him on everything, the overalls, the vehicle, the tire iron, but he doesn't have concrete evidence to prove that he's innocent. We can decide to charge him here, but it's a choice, and honestly, it's probably the wrong one. If we charge him, the case is over, but if we leave, we can interrogate Eli, the creep we found at the school. Turns out he worked at a place called Hennessy Marine, and those were his overalls. HM were just the initials for the company. He knows rope, he's a wanderer, and he has the right shoe size, but he still doesn't admit to the murder. We now have a choice. Do we charge Eli or do we charge Hugo? It's up to us, but the correct choice seems to be Eli. Spoilers, but neither of these men killed this woman. It was someone else entirely, but Eli seems to be the better choice because the longer he's off the streets, the better. And this is sort of the world that we're in now. Things aren't easy, they aren't smooth, they're messy. It's not always clear, and this world is a contrast to how Cole parses things. He takes things in as either right or wrong. Before the next case, we see another flashback. This time, Cole is actually fighting during the war. Cole is interrogating Japanese prisoners and understands why they're fighting, unlike his men. He uses this as a teaching moment for the soldiers that are fighting for him. The next case, the silk stocking murder, begins with a scene in a diner. Cole heads in to meet his partner and the captain. He tells us that we have another case of a dead woman dumped in a park. Cole obviously thinks that this is the same murderer as before, that the men they put away were the wrong ones and the killer is still out there, but this theory is shot down pretty quick. We find the body in an alley, and there's another message from BD, and a ring is missing again. We can find half of a library card in her hand. Rusty just seems to think that someone else used the case details to convince the cops that they didn't do it. We can find a bloodied stocking nearby and follow a blood trail into an alley. It first leads to a woman's hat that says Antonia on it, and then to a pair of women's shoes, a key tied to a valve, a strange code, and finally a rooftop with a letter addressed to A. Maldonado. It seems this trail was placed for the police to find, that the killer is playing games with the cops. We can finally find a case of makeup and a ring before the trail leads back to a can of red paint and the other half of the library card with an address on it for the victim. We can head to the victim's house to speak with the landlord and investigate her home. The place was broken into, and we can find a wedding photo where the victim is wearing a bracelet that she didn't have on her at her time of death. The final thing we can find are divorce papers that were delivered to the victim from her husband. Questioning the landlady leads to us finding out that she thinks her husband Angel could have hurt her. The landlady tells us that she went to El Dorado Bar yesterday and that someone broke into the apartment this morning, but she thought it was an animal. The most important thing she reveals is that the charm bracelet that we saw in the picture was never worn, but kept in a wooden box. We can head to the bar next and question the bartender. Antonia was here last night, very drunk, complaining about her husband. She left a note for Angel. Seems like Antonia wanted to divorce her husband as well. The bartender says he told her to go to the fruit market across the street to call a cab, and she was being swarmed by men because she was drunk. We can head to Angel's apartment, but he and his buddy try to beat us up. When we take them down, Angel maintains that he was at his apartment the whole time. We can search the apartment to find a crate from the fruit market by the bar and matches from the El Dorado bar. A bloody shirt hangs on the wall to dry, and we can talk to the neighbor to find out that Angel did leave his apartment last night. He was lying. We can head back to Central to find a letter that was found in a cab, along with a poem. The poem is from Prometheus Unbound by Percy Shelley. Cole posits the theory that because Prometheus was a titan and defied the gods, the killer is saying that he is untouchable. We can interview Angel upstairs. He says that they argued the night before her murder and she got into a car waiting outside. He knew that she wanted a divorce, but he was refusing it. He also says that the bloody shirt was because he hit his brother for saying bad things about his wife, and that there was a creep who looked at Antonia wrong at the fruit market. We can head there to talk to the man at the counter. He saw Antonia at the market last night. He was selling her alcohol illegally on the side. He says that she got into a car that pulled up, and when we look around, we can find a strange back room. We find a bloody scalpel, dirty clothes, and Antonia's charm bracelet. Clearly, the man working the counter saw more of the woman than just her getting into a car. He makes a run for it, and we chase him down, taking in another murderer. But it begs the question, are these murders connected? Did we get the real guy this time? What's going on? We can't be exactly sure right now. We get another limited flashback once again to the military days. Cole has started to gain a name for himself in the military. His new name is the Shadow. He rules his men with an iron fist. The next case is called the White Shoe Slaying. It begins as a woman steps off the bus and gets stalked by someone in the darkness. You probably know the MO at this point. Woman dumped in the middle of a park. But this time, the woman is clothed, and she isn't marked up like previously. At the crime scene, we find a laundry tag on the body, size 8 boot prints, and tire tracks. A woman shows up who lives nearby and says she saw a homeless man wandering around. She thought he had been in an accident in the war. We can head to the laundromat that matches the tag we found. Inside, we can check the log to find a Mrs. Terraldson and an address. We can head there and give the bad news to the husband. Cole finds a matchbook for Barron's bar, Teresa, the victim's ID, a wet jacket still drying on the door, a size 8 boot, and a picture of the couple turned over. We can even find some rope torn off a boat on the side of the house. A lot of things are working against Mr. Terraldson at this point. A lot of evidence points to the fact that he murdered his wife, just like all of these other victims. When we question the husband, he says that Teresa went to the bar after work before she was murdered. He was at a card game and didn't want to leave. He walked some woman home, and now it doesn't look great for him, but he does have an alibi, for now at least. We can head to the bar next and get the number of the cab that Teresa took home. 2 men were all over Teresa at the bar. One of them was a sailor, and the other was Richard Bates. Bates is actually at the bar, but he runs away. We can chase him down and question him in the street. Bates tried to take Teresa home, but the sailor did instead. Turns out Bates is on parole for assault on a different woman, so he's getting taken to the station. We can get in contact with the cab that took Teresa home last night, and the driver confirms that she was with a sailor. They went to a ballroom, but apparently the sailor has already turned himself in at the station, and we need to talk to him. Jessup, the sailor, had taken Teresa to a ballroom to dance, but quickly grew tired of her. She started getting upset about her kids and husband, and the two took a bus back, where she fell asleep on his shoulder. The LAPD then tells us that they've gotten word of a disfigured homeless man matching the description that the woman gave us at the beginning of the case. Before we follow up on that, we can head to the bus depot and find the route for the bus that Teresa took last night. We can check with the driver to find out that she was dropped off near that same homeless camp. Finally, heading to the hobo camp sees us finding some resistance, and Rusty starts shooting automatically. We end up arresting a man named Stuart Ackerman, who fits the description. In his shack, we find another newspaper. Courtney Sheldon is now visiting Jack Kelso. They were in the war together, and he wants Kelso's help with his dope-selling operation. He needs help negotiating, but Kelso doesn't want to work with them. Investigating the shack, we find out that Ackerman was in the war, fighting the Japanese just like Cole. He also happens to have a coin purse with a crystal ballroom ticket and a piece of rope with blood on it. Heading back to Central, we can talk to Stuart, who has motive for the murder, in that he hates women and admits to killing many of them. Cole charges him with Teresa's murder, and once again, we have a villain to place the blame on, but is it the right one? The next case begins as Cole heads back to the Blue Room. It seems he's started to take an interest in this singer. The studio secretary murder shows us a man stalking a woman in the train yard. We can head to the pawnbroker first, where they found some stolen rings. One of them is from Hartfield Jewelry. Percy Shelley brought the rings into the pawnbroker, and we can get his address. After this, we head to the crime scene. We find the murder victim, ring pried off the body again, a matchbook from Mensch's bar, a list of personal items from a liquor store, and half of a letter trying to convince our victim, Evelyn, to come home. We also find a film company ID for Evelyn. A man named Ferdinand is at the scene. He was doing unspeakable things to the body, and he shows us some lipstick he found at the scene, and they arrest Jameson for being a little freaking creep. We can get an address for the liquor store and head there. Evelyn was staying at the liquor store because she knew the owner. We find a book signed by Governor McCaffrey and a photo of Evelyn and some others. There's a bowling pin here from Rawlings, which could be a lead. We can question the owner of the store. Evelyn was staying at the store since she had been having some trouble, but she had a particular affinity for Mr. McCaffrey. Next stop is Mensch's. The bartender there says she was always a pain, causing trouble and never paying. Governor McCaffrey is here, a writer who knew Evelyn. He wasn't really friends with her, she was more obsessed with him. She apparently stole the book with his name in it, and he gives us the info that she went into a hotel with someone named Tiernan last night. McCaffrey is a communist and has been in trouble for it in the past. We can head back to the LAPD to find out that things are starting to heat up. People are starting to think that these murders are connected. Rusty pushes this info down once again, but apparently the new body had a message scrawled into her clothes. The boys are told to continue investigating, but to keep this new theory in mind. We can head to the bowling lanes and ask about Evelyn. Turns out that Tiernan is a pin setter at the alley. We can chase him down as he gets spooked pretty quickly. Before we question him at the station, we can head to McCaffrey's apartment, where we find the other half of the note that was on the body, a bloody tire iron with the Rawlings logo on it, and a bloody shirt. We're told McCaffrey has a pigeon coop on the roof, and when we get there, he runs just like everyone else. Tracking him down, we take him into custody. Back at Central, we have the job of questioning our two suspects and choosing which one we want to charge. Tiernan admits that he was at the hotel with Evelyn and that she wouldn't stop talking about McCaffrey, so he kicked her out. But it turns out Tiernan was with Evelyn when she stole the book, and McCaffrey claimed he would get her for it. Talking to McCaffrey, who claims that the evidence was planted in his apartment, also claims that Tiernan killed Evelyn and went to him for help. We can finally re-question Tiernan and get him to confess, mostly. He doesn't exactly remember doing it, but McCaffrey told him that he did, that he blacked out. McCaffrey was the one that actually murdered Evelyn. He was trying to convince Tiernan that he did it, which is why he lied and said that Tiernan came to him. We can charge him with the murder. But this doesn't exactly solve our larger case at hand. There's a bigger issue here. Someone is killing girls in this city, and at least a few of the people we've arrested were innocent. Before we begin the final case of the homicide desk, we see another flashback to the war. Soldiers are crossing a bridge, gunned down by fire from every direction. Kelso's unit ends up saving the group and getting them off a bridge that's about to collapse. Cole and his partner are informed that they've received another letter. This time, it doesn't lead to a crime scene, but a scavenger hunt. There's a poem, just like last time, another snippet from a Shelby work. This time, the poem leads us somewhere else, to a fountain in the public square. The Dahlia killer is leaving us some sort of trail. He wants to play a game. The pressure is on because this officially confirms that the BD killer is still out there, that at multiple turns, we got the wrong man. If we play along with the killer's game, we might be playing into his hand, but we might also be able to get closer to him, and unfortunately, it's the only lead we have right now. We have to head to a fountain in a public square where we find another excerpt from a poem. This one talks about plants and caves, a fountain and a curved roof. This time there's a piece of evidence as well, a social security card for Elizabeth Short, the original Black Dahlia victim. Deciphering this poem will lead us to the Hall of Records, to the top of the building where notes have been placed on a chandelier. We can head up there from a maintenance hatch and find another poem, as well as a woman's watch, a Lady Elgin. This watch was Deidre Muller's, the one that was missing and we never found. It's as if the killer is taunting us with our past mistakes. The next poem notes where science bedews his dædal wings. Before we can follow up on the next step of the clue hunt, the chandelier begins to collapse and we have to swing off and jump for our life. After getting out, the next clue leads us to the LA Public Library. We have to climb that tower all the way to the top to find that Antonia's medallion, the one she wore around her neck, is resting here, another thing that we didn't find. The next poem is a bit harder to solve but leads us to the Westlake tar pits. Here we have to track through the tar, walking on platforms to make it to the center island. There we find a shoe, Teraldson's shoe, another taunt. The next poem talks about a sphere and leads us to the LA Art Museum. We solve a maze to get to the center. There we find Celine Henry's garnet ring and even another excerpt, which takes us back to the Jungle Drums set. Climbing through the crumbled ruins, we find Evelyn Summers' ring and a final excerpt that takes us to an abandoned church. This is our last location, as once we get there, the killer reveals himself. He was the temporary bartender working at the Bomba Club. We met him briefly during the Red Lipstick Murders case. He ends up shooting at us and making a run for it. We can chase him down into the catacombs under the church. The only way to get in there is through a side building where we find tons of proof that this was the real werewolf killer. He has a multitude of blood-covered dissection tools and a gory bathtub full of blood. Chasing him into the catacombs, we have to shoot him as he's running away, but eventually have a final confrontation with the murderer in the graveyard. Donnelly then should be congratulating us on another case solved, possibly our biggest case solved yet. A serial killer that's been murdering women all over LA has finally been found. But this isn't exactly the case. Mason is apparently connected, the half-brother of a very high elected official in the US. Cole and Rusty immediately know what's going on. This is all going to be brushed under the rug. Even though Mason is dead, he will never be outed as the Black Dahlia killer. The wrongly convicted men will be quietly let out of prison due to clerical errors or lack of evidence. The DA already has a plan in place. But in good news, Cole will be promoted to vice. He won't be dealing with homicide anymore, but drug crimes. The homicide desk is probably one of my favorite desks in the game. The best thing that it does is build up this massive, larger case. As a player, we are convinced pretty early on that these murders must be connected, and it's honestly an uncomfortable feeling, because every conviction that we get feels just wrong. We know that what we're doing is off, but we still need convictions. We still have to put people away. And the satisfying conclusion to this comes when we finally solve the trail that this murderer has been leaving behind. This should be a big payoff, but it really isn't. Because at the end of the day, no one will really know the truth. The public will never be satisfied. They will be safe, but they will be in the dark. And this leads to this unsatisfaction. But that unsatisfaction feeds back into the overall conspiracy of the story. LA Noire is building to an even larger conspiracy, but building the world around it as one that is cruel, one that doesn't care about the truth, makes our main character isolated. Cole then is presented to us and stands as a bastion of justice in a city full of untruths. Cole's captains constantly rush him to get confessions from people that are innocent. They try to lead him off the trail of a larger killer, and in the end, brush a dead serial killer under the rug. But this also makes us distrust the game as a whole, Because up until now, even through the beginning cases of this desk, for at least a moment we believed that we were putting the right people away. We thought we were solving cases, we thought we were catching killers, we thought we were bringing people to justice. To find out that this man has been behind all those murders might give the player a pit in their stomach when they realize what they did. But the player never really had control over this. But did we ever have control? There's also a sense of relief here, relief that we still have time to get the proof and catch this guy. But once we do, that all comes crashing down. That relief is gone, and we're told that it doesn't even matter. Contrast this with the promotion that Cole gets at the same time. It's a hush job. Shut up and take the new responsibility. How are we supposed to fight for justice in a world where we know these things can happen? Over the final 2 desks, though, this conspiracy will fully come to fruition, and we will see things be played out. We haven't quite yet seen the LAPD fully try to interfere with justice or be specifically behind crimes that are happening, but that will obviously happen sooner or later. Before Cole gets promoted to the vice desk, we see another flashback to the war. We briefly see Kelso giving his men a speech about the war, telling them that their first time fighting will be bad, but they have to grin and bear it anyways. Before we move on, I'd like to talk about the city in LA Noire. It's clear that the team went to painstaking lengths to recreate the period-correct city of LA for this game. They recreated famous locations, they recreated famous structures and parts of the city, and at certain points, it does genuinely feel like you are driving through LA in the 40s. The cars are accurate, the look is there. This is a real depiction of Los Angeles at the time. But LA Noire generally chooses realism over authenticity. Let's talk about the city first, and probably the largest problem with LA Noire. The city of LA Noire is accurate and probably realistic to what the actual city felt like at the time that this game is set in, but in my opinion, it's not really an authentic depiction of a world. This is because the city is so damn large. The development team at the time was really interested in creating a massive, large map, and they advertised the game with this fact in many interviews. But I think this was a case of staying on the rails and in the template of a Rockstar game, but not wanting to create a Rockstar game. In many ways, LA Noire does not feel like a Rockstar game. It does not feel like Grand Theft Auto or Red Dead Redemption, but Team Bondi still wanted to make this huge, massive map for players to explore. But the world really doesn't have anything to do. There's really no justification or reason for this large map to exist. We can't visit stores, we can't buy things, we can't participate in activities. Our goal here is really just to head to different case objectives and move the story forward. We can complete some side activities, the biggest one in particular being street crimes. While driving around LA, we will get calls on the radio to respond to various crimes throughout the city. These crimes are not necessarily related to the desk that we're on, it's just the general crimes happening in the area that we can respond to. These crimes are overall much more focused on shooting, chasing people down, and fighting. These are dire circumstances where we must be called in because it's all hands on deck. There are a couple street crimes that might see us actually picking up a clue or two, but they're few and far between. There are 40 of these across the course of the game, and they do work to break up the cases here and there, but they don't exactly fill the entire world that we have at hand. The best thing that they do is just fill in the cases that we have. Certain suspects or witnesses from other cases will actually appear in these missions, making the world feel more realistic in the process. We can also search for optional collectibles throughout LA, like golden film reels that reference a variety of different noir movies throughout history, or hidden vehicles that represent rare and high-cost vehicles that we can unlock. But because the city doesn't have much to actually do in it, and it's so damn large, it just leaves the world feeling very empty. The world of LA Noire chooses realism because it is genuine and accurate to the period, but it lacks in authenticity because it feels void of activity. The same goes for the realism in the characters that I talked about before. The characters look real and they act real, but they don't necessarily feel authentic. I think this choice works in this case. It makes sense for this world, and it leaves LA Noire with a very distinct style in the end. And this all circles back around to the noir aspect that I talked about before. The presence of the noir genre feels realistic to the time period, but it doesn't feel authentic to the genre as a whole. Realism versus authenticity in LA Noire feels like it can be both a good and bad thing, and I don't think as a whole it's a failing, but a choice that the team made. It wasn't an oversight, but a decision that was made during development. Cole then gets his first Vice case, the Black Caesar, and we get a new partner, Roy Earl. Cole has gotten a large promotion, but a question lingers. Did he get a promotion because his work was so good, or was he moved out of homicide as a way to pay him off because of what he knew about the Dahlia murders? Was he given the promotion to sweeten the deal so that he didn't speak out? We don't know, and Cole doesn't know, but either way, we're in Ad Vice now. 2 dead men have been found in an apartment full of US Army issue morphine. We can head to this apartment to find 2 overdoses, and Cole recognizes the syrettes from his time in Okinawa. Morphine was very commonly used in World War II to administer aid to the wounded before medics could arrive to officially treat the wounds. The 2 dead here are Cornell Tyree and Tyrone Lamont. We know that both of these guys had died from overdose. The goal here isn't to find out what killed them, but to track the drugs back to their source. This is Ad Vice now, not homicide. Cole and Roy immediately don't line up on how they view this line of work.
We are supposed to uphold the law.
Yeah, and we do. But we can't change people. The truth is, everyone wants a license to get a little dirty now and then. Our job is to keep it manageable.
That's how you see it?
See it any other way, and you better forget about being a vice cop.
Roy presents the corruption that the LAPD has at its core, and not just how that corruption is present, but how it is rewarded, as Earl has an incredibly high place in this department and rubs elbows with the highest of people. We can start to investigate the apartment to find a betting slip on one of the victims, tons of morphine syrettes, popcorn cups from a food stand that they were using to transport the drugs, and 2 notes with some sort of code about a radio system and a betting machine. We can head over to the Black Caesar food hut, but the vendor immediately books it. Chasing him down will allow us to search the food hut, where we find a box full of popcorn buckets and morphine. Seems like this stand is being used as a pretty big distribution spot for the drugs. We can also find a ticket for the Blue Room Jazz Club and an illegal gambling slip from Audie's. The man who works at the stand tells us that the person distributing this stuff is named Jermaine Jones, and that the betting operation is run by a guy named Merlin. We can head to meet Jermaine Jones at his music agency, and if we remember the note we found in the apartment that says JJ always listens to 275 FM, we can open Jones's trick radio that reveals a massive stash of drugs, money, betting slips, and a sticker from a company called Ramez Removal. Jones tells us that Lenny Finkelstein, Mickey Cohen's brother-in-law, is the one behind the morphine action. Ramez of Ramez Removals is apparently connected to Finkelstein as well. He makes furniture with hidden compartments for hiding drugs and money. We can head over to Audie's next, where there's a huge operation going on. He's running a numbers operation. These were basically illegal lotteries that mobsters would run during this time period. We can investigate the slot machine nearby and input the symbols that we found on paper earlier to open it up and reveal even more morphine and betting numbers. Audie tries to run, so we have to chase him down. We can investigate his cane to find that Jose Ramez owed Audie $231, but this could just be another coded message for the numbers operation. Questioning Audie will lead to him admitting that Finkelstein has hands in his business too, and that Ramez has a gambling debt to him. Audie is arrested, and we can head to Ramez Removals to find another head to this hydra. There we find a truck speeding off and have to chase it down while the person in the back throws furniture at us. We can then investigate Ramez Removals, finding a ledger with repeat listings from a polar bear ice company. And it just so happens that there's a trail of water coming from the back room. Here we can find a massive inventory of morphine that's encased in ice. Cole and Roy begin to arrest everyone at the company, but Jose Ramez makes a run for it. We end up having to shoot him because he's firing shots off at us. We can then head to our final destination, the Polar Bear Ice Company. Here we have a massive shootout moving through this whole building because everyone here is putting up a huge resistance. At the top floor, we find Finkelstein. He refuses to go quietly because if he gets locked up, he'll be killed anyways, so the detectives shoot him as he goes for his gun. And in the back, we find cases and cases of morphine syrettes. With that, we have another huge case in the bag, a massive one in fact. A ton of drugs have been moved off the streets, and Finkelstein is gone. But where were these drugs coming from in the first place? The next case is called Reefer Madness, and is actually a DLC case. It's one of two in the Vice desk, and without these two cases, the desk is actually only made up of 3 missions. The new DLC cases actually make the Vice desk match the length of the others, preventing it from being the shortest act of this story. A man named Freddie Calhoun is offering up information for pay. He wants to blow up a marijuana-selling ring. We can head over to a diner to find him. He tells us that Juan Cruz stashed 50 pounds of dope at his house. We can head over to Juan's, but they start shooting at us as soon as we get there. After killing these thugs, we find a silver dollar on one of the corpses and identify him as Cruz. We can find a notepad with Masanke written on it, boxes from Parnell's Soup Company, advertisements for 20th Century Market, and a shed with soup cans in it. One of these cans is pulled to reveal a hidden room, full of more soup cans, but these cans are full of illegal drugs, in particular, reefer. The ledger shows us that a particularly large amount of soup is coming from Tijuana with the initials EJ. We can head to the soup factory next where we meet Howard Parnell himself. He gives us an employee listing where we find another Cruz listed as a worker here, Jorge Cruz. Parnell himself doesn't specifically have anything to do with this operation. His business isn't doing well though, and he's hiring illegals to work for him, so he's trying to cover that fact up, but he doesn't know about the reefer being shipped out of here. Jorge works on the night shift and does maintenance on the machines. Parnell then takes us on a tour of his factory, which turns out to be the most boring thing ever. We can talk to one of the dispatchers though, Sergio, who does have a lot to do with this operation. He carries a similar silver dollar to the one we found on the body of Cruz. We also find out that Parnell's does a lot of business with 20th Century Market. Sergio tells us that he sends out shipments from the loading dock once every 2 weeks to the market. Ernesto is the man that drives for them. Jorge was the one canning the drugs up, and then it would get sent all over the country. He also tells us that Juan and Jorge both work for some bigger gangster, but Sergio isn't sure who it is. We can head over to 20th Century Market and find a man working there named Erto Sanchez. Erto has some drugs on him and fesses up to working with the smuggling ring. He specifically gives us the name of an Ernesto Juarez, the man that does the driving. He only works with them because his family was threatened though. He doesn't want to do this, but he's afraid for his family's lives. Ernesto is bringing a shipment to Parnell's tonight, so we can head there and make the bust. The thugs inside put up a big fight and we take them all down. We can investigate the bloody aftermath of our battle and find Ernesto among the dead with another silver dollar for our collection. We can add up all of these pieces of currency with strange print marks to make out the words Masanke Metals. This company must have had something to do with all of this because they're printing these coins that are currently defunct. Once we get to the metal factory, we find it completely abandoned. We have to move through the place and take out a ton of goons, but on the top floor we find a man named Victor Sanders, one that Roy already knows. Sanders acts as if he isn't going to be punished for this, as if the people he works for are too high up for him to go down with the ship. Caffarelli, the vice captain, seems to agree with this, and when Cole asks about Sanders' fate, he is shut down immediately. This adds another mark to the long list of things that the department are brushing under the rug. In this LA, if you have enough money and power, you can get away with anything. We get another flashback to the war, and Cole's platoon is all that remains of the recon team. The squad is being sent up a hill to fight Japanese soldiers. Cole's team is meant for intelligence gathering, not fighting, but right now it's all hands on deck. We then see Courtney Sheldon rushing onto a battlefield as a medic to save someone. This is the same Sheldon that we've seen in the newspaper sequences. He tells Cole that he's putting these men out of their misery though, not saving them. That's murder in Cole's mind, and this is another example of a moral gray interacting with Cole's black and white vision of the world. The setup is the next case that we'll take on, assigned to the Vice desk. It begins at an American Legion boxing event. two men are up to fight. Roy Earl has a lot of money on one of them, as does everyone else in this room. The boxer, Albert Hammond, is supposed to take a fall, but he doesn't, and a lot of people are very angry about this, including Roy himself. Cole wants to get involved because he fears for Hammond's safety. We head to the dressing room to find that Hammond has already bolted. We can find a piece of paper with some fighter odds and a phone number. We quickly realize that Mickey Cohen is out to find Hammond as well. A lot of powerful people were pretty certain that Hammond was going to take a fall, and they aren't too happy that he won the fight. Cole's suspicions were correct, that Hammond's life is in danger, so we need to find him quick. In another example of LA Noire using James Ellroy as inspiration, a similar event takes place in the beginning of the first book in the LA Quartet. The main character, Bucky Bleichart, is set up in a major boxing event against another detective in the agency. He decides to spend all of his savings betting on the other fighter to win in the 8th round, but when he gets in the ring, he decides he can't do it and decides to fight anyways. The fight naturally ends in him losing in the 8th round anyways, but he had a crisis of conscience while he was in there. It seems like taking a fall on purpose is just as hard as winning, and it seems like Hammond did something similar. He bet on himself to win so that he could make extra money with the odds working against him. We can get Hammond's address and head to where he was staying at the Hotel El Mar. Here we find he was getting a room under the fake name Winston Churchill. In his room he has lists of bookmakers' payouts, a letter telling his family that he's coming home, and we find the name of the woman he was spending time with, Candy Edwards. We can get to this woman next, where she's being harassed by another person angry that Hammond lost him money. Here we find a ticket to Akron, Ohio, and a cruise liner that leaves from New York. It seems like Candy was planning on skipping town too, she just didn't do it fast enough. We don't get much from Candy that we didn't already know, but we can tail her when she leaves the hotel to learn much more. She stops off at various bookmakers across town to collect their winnings. We can trace her down all across the city until she eventually heads to a bus stop trying to leave town. Unfortunately, before we get to her, she's shot by someone in the bathroom. It seems that Hammond's manager finally tracked Candy down. We find a revolver and a ticket for the Egyptian theater. There we can find Hammond and his manager arguing. His manager wants blood for what he lost and his money back. We have a shootout and kill the manager when he begins firing at us. Cole decides to let Hammond go free. He technically didn't do anything wrong and is only being tracked down by the corrupt people that wanted to make money from him. Earl is pretty pissed about this, but still decides to lie to the captain with Cole to let him get away. The next case is the final DLC case in the Vice desk, titled The Naked City. We can head to an apartment where a woman has died, and there we find Rusty already on the case. This was originally a homicide case, but now it's being handed over to Vice. In the apartment, we can find a black ring, a man's smoking jacket, sleeping pills, and a prescription for amphetamines. We can also find out that the victim, Julia Randall, was a model. She passed away in the bathtub, seemingly from an overdose of sleeping pills. We can question the maid, Virginia, who tells us that Julia was spending time with a man named Mr. Henderson. After this, we can head to the office of Dr. Stoneman, the man that was prescribing Julia medicine. Julia was a recent patient at Stoneman's office, and he recommended that she slow down on the drugs she was using, but she didn't listen. We can then head to the dress store where Julia was working, but we find out that she was recently fired. She had to be let go because she was too attractive, and the men in the store were too often paying attention to her. We can question Heather Swanson, a woman that Julia worked with, as well. Julia had been friends with Heather's husband, Henry Arnett, for a while now. She doesn't know much about the Mr. Henderson that Julia was seeing. When we head to the coroner, it turns out that his suspicions were correct, that Julia didn't overdose on her own. She was forced. He also has another body here, that of a man named Jimmy LeBlanc. He thinks that LeBlanc could have been the killer because the marks on his face match resistance wounds that Julia would have inflicted. While we're at the station, we can question Henry Arnett, who we called in after talking to his wife. He reveals that he had relations with Julia, and Arnett had heard of this Henderson guy, but didn't know who he was. He says that Julia was trying to get money out of him. Arnett also claims he's never heard of Jimmy LeBlanc. We can then tail Arnett after he heads to pawn something at a broker. He ends up getting a ticket to Mexico City for tomorrow night. He's clearly up to something. On top of that, Arnett was pawning a fake cigarette case. We can then ask another officer that works the beat about Jimmy LeBlanc. LeBlanc was arrested years ago for burglary, but his partner never got caught, a big guy with a boxer's build. Cole decides to check out the contraband list at the station, and we find a lot of the items that Arnett pawned or that Julia had in her possession. We can question the woman that was stolen from next. The woman inflated the value of the items for insurance claims, and she doesn't give us much info. We realize this is all connected when her daughter shows up, though, the same woman that we interviewed at the dress store. We can then head over to Arnett's apartment with Heather, but when we get there, someone is already inside and we have to give chase. He gets one over on Cole though as he hits him with a bat and gets away. We find out Arnett was packed and ready to head to Mexico City and that he had a pretty expensive watch on him. It seems like Arnett was working in some burglary ring with LeBlanc and Randall and this Willie character that we chase down. He admits to this and says that Julia was always hungry for more money. Arnett was trying to get out of the business and marry Heather, but the really big reveal is that the doctor was in on this as well. He was Mr. Henderson, and Julia was stringing him along with the promise that he'd get some in the end. Stoneman admits to this when we storm into his office. Julia and her friends would get names of people from his parties and steal from them. It seems like Stoneman got fed up with this unreciprocated love and decided to take Julia out. He ends up throwing himself out a window before we can take him in. We can track down Willie at his apartment, the last piece to this puzzle, but he shoots at us and runs away as we chase him up the building and blow him away on the Broadway sign. With that, another case is solved and we get to start the final case of the Vice Desk. Before that, we get another scene from the war. Men are being killed, blown up, and gunned down in droves. The Americans are losing and Cole's men are killed in an explosion. Cole manages to come out without a scratch on him, and Kelso finds him the next morning. Cole is commended for holding the line as the Americans are starting to win now. He's recommended for the Silver Star and promoted to lieutenant, but it certainly doesn't feel like a win, as all his men are dead. The final case of the Vice Desk is called Manifest Destiny. We investigate a crime scene where 3 men were killed at a jazz club. Vice is here because there's more army surplus morphine, so it's become a drug issue. It becomes a personal issue for Cole, though, because the owner of the club, Eddie McGoldrick, was killed in the shooting. Cole knew Eddie from his old unit in the military. Turns out the other 2 killed were in a band with the first 2 victims that we found in our first Vice case. Something fishy is going on here. Investigating the crime scene allows us to find some hidden morphine, a pass to the Blue Room Jazz Club, a crate of Valor cigarettes, and some stolen bar rifles. The hostess doesn't tell us much, but draws a peculiar line between the new owner and the club going downhill. Apparently, morphine started circulating once Eddie bought the place, and with drugs comes violence. We can head over to the Blue Room to speak with Elsa Lichtman, the same singer that Cole has been seen frequenting in past scenes. She's pretty reluctant to speak with the police, and so are the band that she's playing with. She knew one of the victims, but doesn't know much about the killings. All we really learn is that the band thinks the morphine was supplied by white men. Elsa talks to Cole alone and uses this time to wage a war of morals against him. She gets into a heated argument about the LAPD's motives and whether they can really win this war on drugs.
I'm asking the questions here.
Then why do you come to me with your stupid questions? You know who controls the drugs in this city.
It's not enough to just survive, Elsa. You have to try and make the world a better place.
Brave words, and very noble. But words are just words, Cole Phelps.
This is another moment that allows us to see into Cole's mind, how he thinks about the world. His rationale is that he's really just doing his job, but Elsa has some words that are a bit more stinging for our shining detective in white. The next obvious stop is going to see Mickey Cohen, the man who controls everything underground in this town. But before that, Cole wants to make sure of something. He decides he'll meet up with Roy tomorrow morning and we can tail Elsa back to her place. When Cole gets there, he goes into her apartment and we see nothing that happens inside. Earl was watching from the outside and is pretty sure he knows that Cole was spending the night cheating on his wife. Maybe the bastion of justice isn't so clean after all. The next day, we question Mickey Cohen at the Mocambo Club. Cole confronts Cohen about the morphine that his brother was selling. Finkelstein only had 1/3 of the total morphine shipment that was brought in. The location of the rest of the drugs is unknown, and Cohen claims he doesn't know where it is either. Cohen doesn't know anything about the link between the Marines and the morphine shipment either. After this, Cole heads back to the station and speaks with the lieutenant to find out that Caldwell is working the case on the stolen morphine shipment. Caldwell confirms that multiple rifles were also stolen from the same ship that the morphine was taken from. He gives us the shipping manifest and we can find all the missing guns and cigarettes that we found at the club. But something even more interesting is that Kelso, Sheldon, and McGoldrick were on the ship as well, 3 men that Phelps served with in the military. McGoldrick was the one that owned the club, so at the very least, he must be connected to this. We then get word that a bus is being shot at on North Bronson. We have to head down quick and take out the shooter. We find a notebook on him that has a phone number and a table listed at Molcombo, the same place that we talked to Mickey Cohen at. It seems like Cohen is trying to kill the men that stole the morphine to get their drugs. The shooter was even using one of these stolen rifles. The man being shot at in the bus is Felix Alvaro, another guy that was in the war with Phelps. Felix was on the ship as well, but doesn't give us any information about the shooting, just that Eddie came into some money recently. Felix does reveal that Cohen thinks that anyone on the ship was a target, and that Courtney Sheldon is supposed to meet with him to sort it out. This was something that we already saw in the newspaper scenes, when Sheldon refused to take a deal from Cohen to sell him the morphine. Felix also tells Cole that Kelso is in LA, and it doesn't seem like Felix has the warmest of feelings for our detective. We can meet Kelso next, who doesn't want to be questioned, but we take him down to the station anyways. He isn't happy about being picked up in front of his apartment, but we can ask him about the morphine. He claims that he had nothing to do with stealing the morphine and that he knew nothing about Eddie being killed. He wasn't even aware that Felix was being shot at or targeted, but he has some choice words for Cole.
Jack, we just want information.
Bullshit, Cole. Did you seriously believe that dragging me down here would get me to give up my own guys? You call yourself a Marine? Trying to make a name for yourself with this shitheel? Look at this chump with his $200 suit and $2,000 car.
In the end, Kelso gives the detectives nothing, but there's another shooting we have to rush off to at a diner. When we get there, the suspects are already fleeing. Chasing them down results in another shootout and 2 dead hitmen. One of them has a shipping manifest with names listed and circled. It seems like a hit list. Driscoll, Beckett, Higgins, and Connolly were all circled. Their next targets were the Hollywood Post Office and the Chinese Theater. It also seems like Cohen was going to meet with Courtney Sheldon tonight at the News View building. We don't get to the theater in time before people are shot, but we do chase down the killers and take them out. The last stop, the post office, is also a battleground when we show up. There's a war in this city for the shipment of drugs, and it's getting very bloody very fast. After the shootout, we find a dying Marine, Walter Beckett, and he gives us a business card for Lenny Finkelstein, Polar Bear Ice Company. And we can find another note about a meeting between Sheldon and Cohen tonight. When we get to the meeting place, Cohen escapes and we have another massive shootout. Directly after this, Courtney Sheldon and Harlan Fontaine arrive at the station to offer themselves up for questioning. We can head there and talk to the pair. It seems like Fontaine is manipulating Courtney for some reason. Sheldon is virtually the only one alive aside from Kelso that was on the manifest and that might have been involved in the morphine theft. Sheldon explains that Cohen just thinks they have the morphine, but they don't. Sheldon admits to being on the ship, but doesn't admit to stealing the drugs. That is, until Courtney asks Cole what he's offering. It seems like he knows something, and he's ready to make a deal, but the chief bursts in and forces Cole to head upstairs. Phelps is suspended pending review. Cole's wife has pictures of him cheating with Elsa. He's being charged with adultery, and the LAPD is using that to take him out. It seems that this is coming at a strange time, when he's gotten a little too close to something that he wasn't supposed to. Cole heads home and his wife is already throwing Cole's stuff on the sidewalk. It's clear who did this to him, who sent his wife's attorney to the pictures, because she didn't get them on her own. It's clear that Roy has some part in this, probably because we were getting too close to the truth. That's all left up to debate for now, but something is clearly afoot here, and Cole is doing police work that's a bit too good for his own well-being. Cole heads to Elsa's apartment and the scene fades to black. This begins our next case and our final desk of the game. We see a man tinkering with some sort of valve on an Instaheat heater. It's Cole's first day on a new desk. He's working arson now. He's going to a review board in December, but until then, he's working in shame at this office. He's a laughing stock now, paraded around for his misdeeds. Cole's new partner is Herschel Biggs, who does not want him as a partner, but he's getting Cole anyways. The interesting thing about this change in the final act is that Cole has been presented as the full good guy up until this point in the game. He wants to do the right thing. He tries to do the right thing. He is strict about rules and morality. But Cole has broken a rule of the world. He cheated on his spouse, and even if Roy Earl wasn't involved, Cole would have still been doing wrong. But the world of LA Noire has gotten its just desserts. Because Cole projects his strict values onto the world, they are projected back onto him, and he is punished for his misdeeds. Our first case is to investigate 2 house fires. The first happened while the family was out of town on vacation. The officer on the scene tells us that the family was in Catalina and the whole block almost burned down. They're bulldozing the rest of this block to build new homes. We can find a nearby InstaHeat heater and its servicing record. We can question the husband, Don Steffens. He had won a trip to Catalina from Gulliver's travel agency. The sweepstakes was from the Suburban Redevelopment Fund. Turns out that the same fund offered to buy their house recently because they're buying up the whole neighborhood, but Don didn't take the money. It already seems like something bigger is at play here. It's no coincidence that the fund tried to buy Don out and then his house went up in flames, now forcing him to take the offer so they can have the property. Biggs doesn't buy that anything else is going on. He's convinced that this is just arson, because usually that's what this department is. It's just fires and insurance. But Cole is coming from a place where something was always going on. Now he's down in the muck with everyone else, toppled from the height of the mountain, and now he has to grapple with that fact. We can head to the next house fire where we meet with the fire chief. This fire had 2 bodies inside, though. We can find a regulator valve nearby on the ground, but someone shows up across the street who is a known arsonist. We can chase him down and find out that he's carrying a matchbook with a cigarette in it, a classic arson trick to buy them some time. Herbert Chapman becomes a suspect in this case, and we can head to the travel agency. Here we can view a ledger of recent winners of vacations from their competition. The Sawyer family, the second home that we visited, also went to Catalina Island by way of competition. We can interview this agent here to find out more about their promotions. There's apparently supposed to be a supervised drawing since this promotion is random, but the Suburban Redevelopment Fund has actually been calling the agency and providing the winners themselves. We can then head to the Elysian Development worksite. These are the registered offices of the Suburban Redevelopment Fund. Elysian are actually investors in the larger fund. We can then head to the fire station to get some more information on what happened with the fires. There's another InstaHeat box that was recently serviced, and the chief also shows us a diagram of the gas supply line. We can put this together, and this little demonstration shows us that the regulator valve could have a flaw in it. Cole and Biggs head over to the InstaHeat factory to talk to the people who make these things. There we interview Ivan Rasik. He tells us that the regulator valve from the fire has been reversed, so it's never properly closed off. He admits that some of the heaters are faulty and they've updated the design, but faulty ones could still be out there. Cole also finds out that some of the people installing and servicing these systems aren't fully licensed and are even criminals in some cases. He gets us a list of the installers that he has on the payroll, and we find that 3 of them have criminal records. We can look into their lockers to find that 2 of them have anarchist propaganda, and the other has a mosquito repellent coil, another device often used in arson as well to elongate the time before the fire starts. The next step is to go question the individual workers who were servicing these pieces of equipment. We can question Walter Clemens, who tells us that one of the other workers, Varley, gets payments from a developer to do their work first. And Clemens claims that he's actually not part of the anarchists. He just had it pushed on him by other people at InstaHeat. The guy seems mostly innocent. When we go see Varley, he immediately starts running. We chase him down and take him in, and the same thing happens with the third worker, Ryan. We can head back to the station and do our back and forth questioning routine on these 2, but only one of them is the culprit here. Questioning Ryan will lead to us finding out that he's very much against InstaHeat, mostly because they peddle shit and it breaks down. Ryan's own house burned down, and another company that InstaHeat takes tech from was responsible. It seems like Ryan has a bone to pick and he's trying to get back at them. Varley, on the other hand, has the know-how to do the crime as well and is even working for the development fund, but so are a lot of other people. Also, it turns out that Ryan was the one who gave him the mosquito coils, implicating the other man further. Ryan turns out to be the actual culprit here, so we can charge him for the crime. Cole actually gets praise for solving this case, especially because things don't often get solved in arson. Cole might actually be able to get something done here. Before we start the next case and try to take on the arson desk a bit further, we see another war flashback. Cole and his soldiers are moving on a building in Okinawa. They blow the place and one of them starts burning the building down with a flamethrower. Cole's squad has been doing this to most of the buildings in the area, and Kelso isn't okay with it. But most of the people in the squads want nothing to do with Cole or his leadership. Ultimately, they think he's bad luck. The next case from the arson desk is called A Walk in Elysian Fields. It begins as we see a man making paper cranes, seemingly from newspaper. We get the order to head to a house fire that has recently claimed 4 victims. When we arrive, we find the family in a terrible state. Based on the evidence, it seems that the victims were moved before the fire burned their bodies. Cole almost immediately thinks they got the wrong guy in the last case, that the same person that did the last fires did these. This theory comes from the fact that the murderer arranged the family in this way. He might have thought that they'd be happier together. It's sick and twisted, but it could be true. The only problem is they need evidence to prove it. We can find another Instaheat heater that was serviced by Varley. Biggs is completely on our side in this whole thing. He watched his own men burn in the war, and he wants this guy to pay. He wants to kill the culprit himself. At this point, Cole remembers that this family, the Morellis, were on the list of promotion winners at the travel agency. We can find cigarette butts in the neighbor's yard and footprints. The neighbor, Dudley Foreman, confirms that the Morellis' home was also being claimed by the Suburban Redevelopment Fund, but he was pushing against them. He's also seen a tall, skinny, bald guy hanging around and watching their house. While we are questioning the neighbor, Biggs found a piece of origami. It turns out to be made out of a flyer for the Elysian Fields Development Company. We can head over to Rancho Escondido to find another burned building, but its foundations are basically crumbling. Poor concrete was used in the construction. We can then go to Elysian Fields headquarters and question Leland Monroe, the head of this company. Monroe doesn't give us much, claiming that he doesn't really know anything about the promotion that all these victims seem to be offered. But he does drop the fact that the mayor and the chief are a part of the fund in an attempt to scare us away with power. In the end, he just claims that he doesn't have any hand in the fires. On the way out, he tries to scare Biggs even further by telling him that he's on the board of the police pension fund. We can talk with the secretary before leaving to find an address for Herbert Chapman, one of the contractors for the company. Chapman was our first suspect in the previous case, the weirdo that was watching the crumbling ruins of the fire. Before we can move on with this case, we see a cutscene in the Blue Room. Phelps is having a drink and watching the performance when Earl sits down next to him. Cole wants nothing to do with him, but Earl offers him a warning to stay away from Elysian Fields. Cole pushes back on this, but he's eventually told that homicide is taking over from here. Roy is obviously involved with the development, and whoever is behind this are incredibly powerful people in this city. Cole can then be seen leaving Elsa's apartment again. Biggs is picking him up. We can then head to Herbert Chapman's apartment. Here we find his neighbor trying to mow the lawn, but his car is in the way. Inside his car we find mosquito coils, 45 caliber bullets, and a flyer for Elysian Fields. Chapman is coming out a laundry and makes a run for it on a trolley. We have to disable the trolley by having Biggs shoot out its control box. We then see Cole coming back to Elsa's apartment. She's received a big insurance payment from her deceased friend. He worked for Elysian as well, and his roof collapsed on him. Cole tells Elsa to reject the settlement. He thinks that her friend was another victim of this massive scam. He tells her to take the information to Jack Kelso, who might be able to help her. He could go to Kelso himself, but the man would never listen to him. This is the end of this case. Finding Chapman meant putting the real culprit in jail, but just because he started the fires doesn't mean that we actually got the people behind this, the real ones that were controlling Chapman and sending him to burn down these buildings for their benefit. The next case, House of Sticks, actually makes a big change to the game right before the finale. We see Elsa head in to speak with Kelso. She shows him the policy payout that she received and tells him that she doesn't want it. She tells him to investigate the case, and suddenly we're playing as Jack Kelso. This is that big change that I was talking about before. For these last few cases, we will begin jumping back and forth between Kelso and Cole. Now, I'm actually a bit conflicted on this decision overall. On one hand, I think that being able to play Kelso allows for some variety near the end of the game. We've seen most of the story through Cole's eyes, and the parts that have been shown to us outside of that have mainly been from newspaper cutscenes. Being able to view the story through a different lens is somewhat helpful and gives a different context to the finale. It also allows the finale of the story to go in a different direction than it couldn't if we stuck with Cole the entire time. The biggest reason for switching to Kelso, though, is probably its best strength overall. The main reason that we find Kelso becoming a playable character near the end is that the development team felt that Cole was too morally good to be able to do the things that needed to be done to solve this whole case. The case requires someone that is willing to work outside the bounds of the law, someone that is willing to do the things that no one else will do. Cole is too much of a knight in shining armor to be able to work around the rules, and at the same time, he almost doesn't even have the means to be able to figure out who's really behind this and do something about it, because he's fallen from grace, he's in arson now. Kelso is our dark horse, he's the yang to our hero's bastion of justice, and all of these things work to make this a good decision for the finale of the game. But on the other hand, I think that this change happens a bit too late in the game. By the time we switch over to Kelso, we're nearing the finale of this story, and there's only a few cases left. We just don't have a ton of time to get Kelso in our mind as a main character. He has been present in the war flashbacks, and he has been around in some of the cases, but we don't get to view him as someone incredibly important to solving this case until this mission. And I think this could have been fixed if we got to play Kelso in just one or two more cases a bit earlier in the game. Even if they were just short sequences at the end of desks, it would have made a bit of a difference. I don't hate or love this decision, I probably land somewhere in between. I respect the decision and I think it was probably good for the story, but I think the execution could have been better. We can review the victim's file as Kelso to find information on the building blueprints and the insurance policy. We also find out that Lewis, the victim, was employed by Elysian Fields when he died. Elsa ultimately wants an investigation launched into the building that collapsed, killing Lewis. She thinks that Elysian Fields and the insurance agency that Kelso is working for are a part of a larger conspiracy. Kelso is then called to Benson's office. Benson is the vice president of California Fire and Life, the insurance agency that Jack works for. Kelso tries to bring the case up to his boss and how it's fishy, but Benson snaps at him and tells him to do his job. He's connected in some way to Leland Monroe, and he doesn't want Kelso digging any further. Of course, this does the opposite and spurns Kelso to look further into this. We head to the Elysian Fields building site and find some receipts for materials that don't make sense. It seems like the developers are cutting corners on the building process. We also find some building codes were broken and certain houses were ordered to be demolished by the city. Another letter from Leland Monroe was pushing down on the company for delays. One of the workers at the building site ends up squaring off with Kelso after he refuses to leave. Beating his ass gives us the ability to investigate the site freely. Looking into the building materials, we can find that materials not meant for actual construction were being used. They were from Keystone Film Studios. As we find this, though, the man from before jumps into a bulldozer and tries to kill Kelso. We have to run away from him and make sure to avoid obstacles without getting crushed by machinery. Once Kelso gets out of here, he heads over to Keystone Films, where he finds the studio has been closed down for 6 years. The Suburban Redevelopment Fund is now in charge of the place. The guard leaves and allows us to hop the fence to look for some information. We can find some information on the materials they were using. They weren't meant for structural use, as we already knew. And in a screening room, we can find a film of a conversation between the people involved in the Suburban Redevelopment Fund. Fontaine, Monroe, Benson, and the police chief are all present in the film. They were planning on building houses for returning vets and getting a freeway bill passed so that people could realistically live out there. Kelso has started to figure it out, and he's getting close to finding some answers, but he definitely needs more proof. Before we get to that, though, we jump back to Cole, who is heading back to his favorite spot at the Blue Room. He waves to Elsa and heads outside to meet her in an alley. Elsa feels bad about involving Kelso in all of this. She thinks he deserves the right to decide whether to help Cole or not. He still doesn't know that Cole sent her. Cole promises to go see Kelso in the morning. Kelso then heads to another Elysian Fields development site. As he's investigating, he's swarmed by goons and gets jumped and thrown into the trunk of a car. Kelso manages to escape before the car reaches its destination and makes a run for it. He reaches Elsa's place and walks in to find Cole aiming a weapon at him. He collapses on the floor before he can say much, and that serves as the end of this case. We see another flashback to the war as Kelso's squad is moving on enemy positions. Cole's team is behind, checking every cave and crevice, clearing everything they find. They want to clear a cave with flamethrowers, and one of his men rushes into a cave by himself. The next case, a polite investigation, begins as Kelso is waking up in the hospital. Elsa is waiting for him to come to, and she tells him about this being Cole's crusade. Kelso has realized that there is something deeper going on in Elysium Fields. As Elsa leaves, an assistant DA named Peterson comes to talk to him. He's planning to run for DA, and he thinks that Kelso is a straight shooter. He wants to bring down the corruption in the Vice Squad as his campaign platform. He wants Kelso to work for him, and he's willing to pay. It seems like Kelso made a deal with him, but the game skips ahead and we're in control of Kelso again. We can head to Curtis Benson's apartment where Kelso decides to confront him with a gun. He uses a bit of force to scare Curtis into standing down, mostly because he knows Benson sent those goons after him. We can find out that Curtis is sleeping with someone perhaps a bit too young and a certificate for shares in the Suburban Redevelopment Fund. Curtis is fully connected to the fund as well because he has an insurance agreement with them. We can question Curtis next to find him admitting to fraud, but he hints that there's something even larger at play here. Kelso's goal at this point is to find proof. He needs to follow the paper trail, because if he does, it might lead him back to everyone else that's involved. And the strongest at the top usually think they're too big to fail. But you know what they say about flying too close to the sun. After his confrontation with Curtis, Kelso heads back to the insurance office. Here he looks over Elsa's settlement papers once again. He can find the location of the house and the fact that the house was only valued at $900, but the updated valuation was much higher. They were inflating it to make it look better. Cole then comes to see Kelso. He's coming here with hat in hand, figuratively. He offers an apology, a sincere one, for getting Kelso involved. But Cole believes the stakes are real and high, that these people are murdering civilians for one reason or another. Kelso has some pointed words for Cole about courage.
I know you, Cole. You're still beating yourself up over that medal on Sugarloaf. The medal you think you didn't deserve, but you just don't get it. Nobody deserves a medal. It's just the ridiculous situation you find yourself in and how you react to it. You think you failed up on that hill. But courage isn't a tap you can turn on or off. Courage isn't permanent. It's a tenuous and fickle thing. Courage and cowardice exist in every man. Get over it.
While Cole is presented as a bastion of truth and justice throughout the game, he also believes that he doesn't deserve these things. He's martyring himself in every case that he deals with because he believes he's atoning for undue praise that he earned in the war. With this conversation, Kelso and Cole have entered into a tenuous working relationship, and Kelso means to head to the Hall of Records. Getting up to the law registry offices, we go through the arduous process of rifling through files. Kelso finds out exactly who is behind the fund and is shocked to realize that Courtney Sheldon is involved. We can look up the exact plot for the Lewis Case home. It was valued at $350, but the new home in that same plot is valued at $3,500. They definitely aren't spending that much on these homes, but they'll earn way more than they invested when they all burn down. As Kelso gets this information, a group of hitmen show up to kill him, forcing us to shoot our way out of the building. Kelso then tracks Sheldon down to the school to confront him about the fund. Courtney acts oblivious at first, but eventually fesses up to the fact that Fontaine was the one that took the morphine after the robbery. Courtney really was a part of the heist and gave the drugs to his friend/doctor. Fontaine then reinvested the money and it went into the fund. Kelso reveals the truth about the fund, which Sheldon seemed genuinely oblivious to until now. Back in Kelso's apartment, he gets a call from Leland Monroe, who requests a meeting. Kelso immediately calls someone else, and we see him meeting outside of Monroe's mansion with his remaining military buddies. They begin to storm the mansion, which is exactly what we have to do. We take on tons and tons of guards, a veritable army on our way up. We eventually arrive at Monroe's room, and Kelso shoots him in the leg. While Leland is writhing on the ground in pain, we can search the office. We can find his payroll records to learn what we already know, that Roy Earl is being paid a hefty sum to work for these men, and that Earl was actually keeping an eye and reporting on Fontaine and his drug dealings. We also find a specific list of people that weren't willing to sell their houses and whether they had been taken out yet or not. Kelso gives a call to Phelps, who tells him that Elsa has been kidnapped. The man that did it supposedly worked for the fund, specifically Fontaine. He was the one that lit all of the fires for the houses. Kelso leaves Monroe bleeding out on the ground as he exits the mansion. The next case, while intense and pretty big, gives us a bit of a breather between the larger conspiracy at hand. Cole still has to complete arson cases because he's still an officer. This is the final DLC case, called Nicholson Electroplating. While Cole and Biggs are discussing this conspiracy and how they have to be ready for Kelso when he gets the info they need, at this time a massive explosion happens in downtown LA. We have to rush towards the affected area in one of the coolest sequences in the game. Cars are rushing away from the place, ash is falling everywhere. It's a terrible, tragic, and huge moment. When we get to the site, we find out what's happened. A massive electroplating facility has exploded. There's been multiple deaths. We can find some evidence like an airplane part, a laundry tag from some decimated clothing, and a very strange briefcase. The briefcase has some spy equipment like a camera, an odd earring, a business card from someone named Tomoko Okamoto. There's also a coded message here and cipher. We can decode the message to reveal that it says North Vermont Avenue. We can interview Fred Nicholson nearby, who is the owner of Nicholson Electroplating. They were testing a new electroplating process, a way to chemically polish aluminum. Okamoto was an assistant to the chemist that was developing the process. Cole thinks she may have been sort of a foreign agent, spying for another government. It's possible that she was a corporate spy working for another company as well. We can head to the address listed for Okamoto, where we find a man dead in the fridge. He was shot multiple times, clear assassination. He was wearing a pilot's watch, a Longines Lindbergh. I just want to quickly shout out here the attention to detail on the different watches in the game. There are 3 in total that we find throughout various cases as evidence. One of them is a Vacheron Constantin, and it seems like the team actually knew what they were doing when it came to antique watches. They look pretty authentic when it comes to the brands that they're trying to represent. I tried to find the specific Vacheron Constantin and the Lady Elgin watches that were in the game, but I couldn't match them with a specific model, so I'm not sure if they were just made up on the fly, but they look really good and they're very well done. I just wanted to say that because it very clearly seems like there was at least some sort of watch head on the team at Bondi. In the apartment, we also find that the victim has some sort of class ring on, and we find a tie pin nearby for a retired LAPD officer. In the bedroom, Cole finds a matching earring to the one that we found in the briefcase. When put together, these earrings open to reveal a microfilm. Leaving the apartment, we can head to the laundry. We can match the tag that we found to an Oscar Hangstrom. Before this, we can head to Hughes Aircraft, the company that we found parts from at the electroplating site. Here we can question Vernon Mapes, a former LAPD officer and head of security at Hughes Aircraft. Mapes doesn't know much about the explosion, and it's possible that the tie clip that we found at Okamoto's was his. He does admit that Hughes had sent parts to the electroplating facility to test their new process. We can investigate the facility and find a note with coordinates that lead to the Bahamas. We can also find a photo of Marie McDonald in Mapes' office and a drum of linseed oil. Investigating one of the plane spinners will allow us to find that there's oil covering the inside of the metal cap. Leaving, we can head back to the station where someone from tech services wants to talk to us. We can review the photographs from the spy camera that we found. We find a picture of the man who we found in the fridge, except he's, well, alive. It seems like he worked for Lockheed. Another picture shows us Hughes and Mapes, except Mapes has the exact pin that we found in Okamoto's apartment. A picture also had the formula and notes for the new chemical process, and another photo seems to show McClellan and Mapes together. The final picture shows two people walking into a house, and the number on the door is very clear. It's obvious this is our next location to investigate, but before we do, Tech Services shows us what happens when the chemicals listed in the notes are combined. A massive explosion happens, even on this small of a scale. The microfilm was also expanded, showing the patent of the new invention that the electroplating facility was using. Finally, we can head to the house we saw from the photograph. We find out that Hangstrom is the same person as McClellan, the man that was working on the new formula at Nicholson Electroplating. Mapes then tries to set the place on fire and we have to escape. We can chase him back to the hangar and get into a massive shootout with the guards. This was clearly a case of huge corporate espionage. McClellan was trying to sell his formula to competitors and Mapes was taking everyone out that could beat him. I do like this DLC case. It's actually pretty interesting and the stakes are really high. That's something that a lot of the cases in the game lack, especially in the early game. Obviously, it's clear that the team wanted to slowly ramp things up over time, but this case feels like it has the proper stakes for the stage of the game that we're in. The main problem that I have with this DLC, though, is that it massively interrupts the story of the game. The DLCs are plugged in between different cases throughout the course of the game, just as I've been presenting them. And in most other cases, the missions are well placed and provide some breathing room for the main story. But this case wildly slows things down, especially because we play this case right before the final mission. With the last we saw of Kelso's story, things should be coming to a head. They should be closing down. Everything should be finishing up. But this case stops all that in its tracks so that we can go figure out some mystery of corporate espionage. As the last case begins, we see Elsa visiting Harlan Fontaine. She seems to have been a prior patient of his, but she hasn't been visiting as much since seeing Cole. Their relationship is going well, and she's feeling better in her life. She starts talking about Kelso and Cole and the case they're working on together. Clearly, as the audience, we know what's happening, but Elsa confronts him for his involvement in the Elysian Fields development. Fontaine eventually knocks her out, and we see this was how she was kidnapped. Before he can kill her, though, someone rushes in and strangles the doctor. The mystery man takes Elsa hostage and runs away with her, and we begin the final case of the game, a different kind of war. With Kelso's current evidence, he's figured out that the true arsonist that's been doing Monroe's dirty work is some sort of bug sprayer. We have to check out different pest control companies in the area to try and identify him. Before we do that, we should probably wrap up the story from the different newspapers that we found throughout the game. Through the papers, we eventually see the corruption of the Suburban Redevelopment Fund, Roy Earle's involvement, Sheldon's eventual death by Fontaine's hand after he finds out the truth, and finally a scene with Cole and Earle. We find the second to last newspaper when playing as Kelso. Cole has found Sheldon's body, and Roy claims that he's figured out Sheldon was the culprit behind the morphine heist. Cole gets pretty pressed about Sheldon's death, and especially Earle being involved here.
Courtney Sheldon was a corpsman, Roy. He served his country. He went out with a medical kit and an Army 45 into places that made the Valley of Death look like a picnic. He was either naive enough or dumb enough to get involved in the Suburban Redevelopment Fund, along with the mayor, the DA, Monroe, and a certain crooked cop. He was involved in the morphine heist, but he has a puncture wound in his jugular, which makes this a murder case. He was a better man than you'll ever know. You say one more word about him and I will blow your fucking head off!
The final newspaper sees Monroe and Fontaine talking at dinner. They're both worried about their operation being blown up. Fontaine promises to take care of his arsonist, and Monroe promises to take care of Kelso. It's quite fitting that these men would be both of their undoings. Kelso eventually heads to Westlake Pest Control, where he gets the address for his suspect at Rancho Recondito. We then swap over to playing Cole a day earlier. We're tasked with investigating the murder of Harlan Fontaine and Elsa's kidnapping. We can find a lighter on the man that has the initials IH, a crystal ball that was used as a murder weapon, hard solid proof that Fontaine was helping burn the houses down, and a map of the houses being built against the freeway that's under construction. Kelso apparently had the whole thing wrong. The houses are actually on the path of the freeway, which allows them to sell the house for a high price. But the houses are still shit, and the insurance raises the price of the homes without any improved value. This whole thing is a scam because the houses are cheap and liable to fall apart, but the government will have to buy the houses and the land for an inflated value because of the insurance. Cole maintains that the only way to get all these guys with solid evidence is to find the arsonist. We then jump back to Kelso, who has arrived at the home of the pest control / arson man. He finds a massive flamethrower in his house, a room full of origami cranes, a blueprint map of the tunnels under the LA River, and a picture of Cole's squad in Okinawa. Kelso calls the assistant DA and tells him to meet him at the tunnels. He's got everything he needs to wrap this up. He sends another message out to Phelps, but before we see it, we switch to Cole's perspective. Cole receives a report from Kelso that a kidnapping suspect is in the LA River tunnel system with a hostage. The entire LAPD is now chasing after Kelso because they know that he knows too much. We have to head to the tunnels, but defend Kelso from the LAPD on the way. He was sending out a report so that Cole would hear it and make sure that he didn't get silenced. Once we get to the tunnels, Kelso has a plan. They're going to head into the tunnels from different entrances. They luckily have someone to help them out. The assistant DA is here to hold the LAPD off and negotiate himself a new position. At this point, we play Kelso as he moves through the tunnels, defeating enemies the entire time. This is the finale, and we crawl through water, shoot goons, and wipe out waves of thugs. In a way, this feels like a battlefield. It feels like we're back in the war again, but the war is under the feet of our own civilization. Once we get to the end of this sequence, Kelso finds the arsonist in the tunnels. He's holding Elsa hostage, but Kelso knows exactly who he is. He refers to him as Tex, the same thing that was written on the Black Dahlia bodies. Kelso tells him that he just wants to get Elsa out. He isn't here to kill him.
Where's your uniform, Sarge?
At home in my locker, Hogaboom. War's over, soldier.
I know that, Sarge. I'm fighting a different kind of war. I fight for God now.
We all fight for God, Ira.
Cole then shows up, aiming his gun at the man with the flamethrower. This man is revealed to be Ira, the man that Cole was having burn the caves in Okinawa. It's also revealed that the cave Cole wanted burned was full of civilians. Kelso hands Elsa off to Cole as the two try to escape. We then get one more flashback to the war, after Cole had ordered the cave of civilians burned. The innocent people are on fire, burning alive, and Cole orders the others to put them out of their misery. But when Cole is turned around, Sheldon shoots him in the back. Kelso ordered the men to get Cole out and get him treated, and Kelso told them all to never speak of it again. It seems that this is what Cole got his award for. He took a bullet from one of his own men rather than the enemy. We then cut back to present day as Cole is trying to get Elsa out of the sewers. Cole gets her out and Kelso after, but there isn't enough time for him to get out before he's washed away in the sewers. The next scene cuts to Cole's funeral and it's markedly empty. Roy Earl is giving a big speech about him and his achievements. Earl never went down with the ship. The ones that died were made either martyrs or took the conspiracy to their graves.
Go to her. Will you, Herschel?
A reformer who
You were never his
recognized
friend,
the need to
Jack.
remove the odd bad apple from a department
right.
made up of good men.
Herschel?
A man who never gave up.
Yeah, Jack.
Who
I was
continued
never
to
his
fight
enemy.
the good fight.
I think you knew that, Jack.
The fight that cost him his own life.
Cole Phelps gave his life to save the city, to burn the corruption away from the institutions that ruled it. Most will never really know the truth and what happened, and before he died, he was tarred and feathered for the life he chose to live. The post-credit scene shows what actually happened on the ship with the soldiers. They're finding out about Cole joining the LAPD through a recent paper. Kelso was the only one that didn't really want to join in on the hassling of their former comrade. But Sheldon brings up the idea of stealing the morphine on the ship. Kelso wants no part of it and tries to get them to realize that he will want nothing to do with them if they go through with this. But in the end, it didn't really matter because Sheldon went through with it regardless and paid the price. And this is where LA Noire calls it quits, on a relative tragedy, but a fitting thematic climax. Cole, when he is first introduced to the story, is a knight in shining armor. He's the bastion of truth and justice. He follows the rules to a T, and doesn't bend no matter what. It gets to the point where it becomes a nuisance to those around him, but he's still fighting the good fight. He's catching criminals and he's rooting out corruption. And as he rises in the ranks, he becomes the golden boy officer. He's quickly getting promotions and moving up the chain. His name is being spread around. But over the course of the story, we realize that Cole's reputation is tarnished. There's a reason that he's doing all of this. There's a reason that he feels the need to try to be this upstanding officer of the law. Because of what happened in the war, and because of the undeserved rewards, he feels like he needs to make up for this imbalance in the world. And Cole is probably the most interesting character in the game, but his relationships with every other character work to build him up and make a far more interesting world. His partners Earl, Herschel, Rusty, Bukowski, Fontaine and Sheldon, Monroe and the Chief, everyone here has their own reasons for being involved, but they're all players on this grand stage. And at the end of the day, the story that we see isn't just some great detective narrative. It's a battlefield. It's a war. Most of our characters fought in the war, but when they come home, they're fighting a different kind of war. Sheldon and the men that stole the morphine are fighting for some sort of reward, some sort of justice in the form of their livelihoods. Cole is fighting the war for justice in the world around him, being an agent of truth to return a balance to this reality, to this city. Kelso is fighting the war of morality with himself and everyone around him. He's trying to find some sort of middle ground between Cole's world and Sheldon's, and in the end, he finds himself caught in the middle. Ira is fighting a war in his mind, but also being used by everyone around him. He returns home to be used as a tool for others, a weapon, a right hand of God. And in the end, the conspiracy doesn't even feel like it's fully solved after Cole's death. Not everything is right in the world, and Kelso is left to compromise with what this city has become. And the finale only really has one fitting comparison. It harkens back to that last scene in Roman Polanski's 1974 noir film, as Walsh grabs Jake Gittes and ushers him away from the horrors he's just seen, and utters the final line of the film.
Forget it, Jake. It's Chinatown.
LA Noire is a fantastic game, but it's also messy and difficult to grapple with in certain ways today. It's not perfect, it isn't some 10 out of 10 untouchable masterpiece that no other story will ever reach. Its world is a bit too big, the actual experience is a little different than how it seems on the outside, it's clunky in a lot of ways, the story sort of spoils itself in certain spots, it can be paced strangely and a little inconsistent, but it also does a lot to make itself stand out over time. LA Noire's systems and mechanics of questioning and investigation really feel like something that deserves revisiting, and no other game has really managed to capture this same feeling even 13 years later. The dynamic results of each case, with every mission having different outcomes based on how you pursue the mission, what questions you get right or wrong, and entirely blocking off content if you don't complete the case in the perfect way. These are all bold decisions made by the developers, attempting to do something incredibly unique for the time. And not just unique in the overall gaming market, but even breaking out of the mold of their publishers' previous games. Releasing a Rockstar game at the time that wasn't entirely GTA or Red Dead Redemption was a risk to take, and they surely took it. The game's story is probably its strongest point. It feels like a combination of multiple different noir sources. LA Noire wears its inspiration on its sleeve, and while it does feel like a massive ode to all the things that came before it, the spirit here is one different than the noir genre as a whole. LA Noire carves out its own space among the rest. Instead of simply adding to the caves that were already present, LA Noire rips a massive chunk of rock out and starts chipping away its own special place to live. Most of this is because its aesthetic choices, its style, its tendency to lean towards realism. And LA Noire is such a product of the time that it can't be separated from the year 2011, when realism in games was a goal to be achieved, total assimilation with film, and when characters and worlds needed to look as real as possible to show and illustrate that gaming was just as serious as the rest of the mediums out there. If LA Noire came out today, it would probably look completely different and most likely wouldn't feel as distinct as it does. And a big reason that LA Noire still stands out all this time later is because nothing like it has really been attempted since. There hasn't really been another project that has tried to do this realistic noir style set in the 40s since LA Noire. If you want to scratch that 40s noir itch and get the same feeling that you'll get from watching a movie like Chinatown or The Big Sleep, but in video game form, then LA Noire is really the only game that will do that for you. And it's a shame because I think a lot could be done with these ideas, and I would certainly play any other game that's based in 40s LA or even New York with a detective edge. LA Noire was pretty successful on release. Critics favored the game as it currently sits with an 89 out of 100 on Metacritic, and the game did well with audiences too. It sold 4 million units in its first month alone and 7.5 million units by September of 2017, well exceeding its budget of somewhere around $50 million. But LA Noire would be the only game that Team Bondi would ever release. The studio would become defunct by the end of 2011. Soon after the release of the game, Team Bondi would get into all sorts of hot water. Employees would first come forward to note that they were left out of the credits of the game or wrongly placed in the special thanks section. Most of these were former employees that left before the game was completed, and Team Bondi saw fit to not include them if they didn't stick around until the end. This is not how things are usually done, but for whatever reason, Team Bondi made this choice. Shortly after this, many former employees came forward to speak out about the environment at Team Bondi. Brendan McNamara in particular was noted as having been mismanaging the studio for a long time and micromanaging employees. He would often work around team leads to give specific employees directions if he wanted things changed. McNamara defended most of these claims by noting that he was obsessive about game design. Employees also accused the company of quite often forcing crunch time and making employees work very long hours. Dave Hieronymus, the lead gameplay programmer on LA Noire and one of the original founding members of Team Bondi, was the only one to come to the studio's defense. He wrote a letter stating that he did not agree that employees were forced to work long hours, and that he actively tried to stop that behavior when he saw it happen. Regardless of what actually happened at the studio, it was shut down before the year ended. The company's assets were sold to Kennedy Miller Mitchell, a film, television, and game production house. They started developing a spiritual successor to LA Noire almost immediately, titled Whore of the Orient. The game was set to be published by Warner Brothers Interactive, but they withdrew from the project in 2013, and KMM was shut down as well. Some successors of the studio, people who worked for both KMM and Team Bondi, would form another successor studio called Intuitive Games, but they've been quiet since around 2018. McNamara would go on to found his own new studio called Video Games Deluxe, who worked on the VR case files for LA Noire and were one of the studios credited with outsourced work on the GTA Trilogy remasters by Grove Street Games. They also are apparently working on an unnamed AAA title for Rockstar Games. If I had to guess, we probably won't get another game like LA Noire anytime soon. The game was incredibly ambitious for its time, and it would still be ambitious if it was made today. The current climate just most likely wouldn't allow for this level of experimentation, but luckily the game will forever rest in video game history as a messy, beloved, interesting piece of art. Bye now.